Okay, good to go. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Barb. I'd like to open our instruction work group, and our first order of business is written registration and any in-person or virtual speaker. And I wanted to confirm that we have none, Barb. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so moving on from public appearance, we looks like we don't have any minutes to approve.
Yes, we do. We do for June 1st. Yep.
Okay. So I'd like to entertain a motion to move to approve the minutes for June 1st.
So moved, Nikki Vandermeulen.
Second, Ali Muldrow.
Moved by Nikki, second by Ali. Any discussions? All those in favor signify by, oh, Julia, your advisory vote.
Aye.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, motion carried.
Thank you.
At 6. So we're gonna get started with the presentation, but before that, Dr. Jenkins, do you have any words of wisdom or how we wanted to center it? And then I have a couple of things before Lisa gets started. Oh, you turn your mic on, please.
Thank you so much. I am very excited about tonight and to hear our presentations that we have on all of the topics, actually, as we've been working behind the scenes to make sure everything goes well. But this first one on early literacy and what you're going to be hearing in terms of our next steps, I think Lisa and the team, they put together a plan of action that's going to really be in alignment with what we have in terms of our strategic framework and our core goals, core beliefs here. So let's just get started. I'm ready to go.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Dr. Jenkins. I just wanted to share with my colleagues that this work has been extremely inspiring to see unfolding. We definitely had a detour or a pause or something that got us a bit distracted and experiencing over the last 6-7 months a pretty considerable impact in our schools and our students and our staff with the global pandemic. But I'm really excited that Lisa stayed on course with what was needed and prepared for a comprehensive early learning structure that we have been discussing since the last time we met. We also have managed to energize and motivate so many staff at MMSD, and so it's really exciting to see school staff and also central office staff that are going to speak to many different parts of our presentation today. I know that this is a topic that many of my colleagues get really excited and we have lots of things to say. So the way in which we're gonna go over the meeting today is please take notes and we're gonna have a pretty comprehensive slides on data because I know also so many of you, and with a lot of appreciation, really want us to ground it to like, what is the data telling us in order for us to be making the most equitable decisions for our students and across the district. So surely after our data slides, we'll do a brief pause and then go around for from some questions. This work is exciting, and we are just gonna get like a really good preview of it. And then of course, there's so much more learning that we're going to continue to be doing, specifically because we are still in 2020. 2020 is not done, unfortunately. So we're still under a lot of duress and still negotiating a lot of a new landscape. With that, I want to pass on to Lisa and then to many of former colleagues, but people that I know and appreciate and care a lot. And then when Lisa, when your staff is coming on and turning their camera on, if they can please take a moment to just introduce themselves and what their role is, their names and their roles at MMSD. So with that, Lisa, please take it away.
Thank you, Dr. Jenkins, and thank you, Ananda, for the welcome and the introduction to our work.
We are really happy to be here tonight. This has been a long time in the making, and it is important that we're all here to talk about our focus on early literacy.
Lisa,
This has,
something is happening with your audio and it's getting chopped up a little bit. Have you been, and I can see your video is also not the best quality right now. Can you move somewhere else?
let me try something.
Okay.
As Lisa's preparing that, I would just like to say to you what she was beginning to say in the beginning. It's been a long time coming, and walking right in the door, just hearing all the great work that's going on. But having our team here tonight to hear directly from the people who are closest to the work, I think is just going to be amazing. And we're not there, and I appreciate you saying that. And then in the beginning, we're in the infancy of where we're headed with this. And there's going to be a much larger discussion continued. And it's going to be very collaborative as we're going to include the voices of not only our staff here, but we're going to be talking to parents too. And parents have been in this discussion about reading. This is early literacy itself and the design of elementary schools and what we can do to maximize, to take an equity focus on the work that we're trying to do. So Lisa's back now, but you're going to hear all of that in that. So go right ahead, Lisa.
Okay, is this better, Ananda? Excellent. Okay, so we are really happy to be with you. Again, thank you. We have got a great team with us here tonight. And you know, I've been in this business over 30 years, and I have to tell you that the people on this group tonight have taught me over the last couple of months about the importance of this work and the work that we've already done. So it should be a really an opportunity for us all to hear from our experts that we have here on staff, and also hear about what some next steps are for us as we move through this work. I do want to make one special introduction tonight of a new staff member that we have. We have a new interim Director of Literacy and Humanities, and that is Gabi Bell. Gabi, can you shine your face to us all here? Welcome. Gabi has stepped into this position with grace and professionalism, and she brings with her to this position a really keen eye towards biliteracy. So we have this dual focus on English learning and also biliteracy. And we are so happy that Gabi stepped up in a bit of an organizational shift in curriculum and instruction and OMGE. And you'll be hearing from Gabi a little bit later in the presentation. So we are really happy, Gabi, that you're here. We also have tonight Kaylee Jackson, our Executive Director of Curriculum and Instruction, that will be chatting with us also about early literacy. And then I want to just call out Jackie Smith, the principal from Gompers, and also Sarah Larson, principal from Elvium, my home school. Long time ago, I was there, and Sarah is making it just better every day. So thanks to the principals for sharing their work as well. So the PowerPoint deck that we have for you tonight is full, and it's a long PowerPoint deck, but it's important. And when we get to the data, you're going to see why this work really matters, why early literacy matters, and why it's a game changer for us, why we think it's a game changer. This work is big, and the impact that it can have is very big. So we're going to go through the data slides. We're going to go through pretty quickly. We're going to tell a story about the data. And then, as Ananda mentioned, we're going to pause, take some questions. We have Andrew with us to help answer any questions. And then we'll finish up with a draft phased approach that we'd like your feedback on. But we are very important. We're very happy to join with you and partner with you in this important work. So Barb, I think we're ready for the PowerPoint if you're driving.
Got it?
Okay, and we can go right ahead to the next slide. So we have done a great deal of work around anti-racist practices, courageous conversation, equity work. But this work tonight that we're going to talk about, this is an example of moving from talking to actual action. This is about anti-racist practices and high expectations, and those two cannot be separated. They are one and the same. This is actually a strategy of offering students grade level text and foundational skills that raises the bar for all of our children so that students can be successful. Accelerating the learning to disrupt the gaps that we see and actually make a difference in the learning and trajectory for students. Next slide. So this is an investment in our children, in our staff, and in our community. And it's rooted in our commitment to Black excellence. This, as I said, is a strategy for Black excellence. And we need to help our teachers, our families, and our community understand the science of reading, understand why it's a game changer, and understand what the research says. This research has been out there for years. It's been out there for a very long time. And as we commit to students receiving grade level, high quality, and standards aligned accelerated instruction, we have to really take the time to understand what the research says and apply it to our practices. I want to be sure to say something. We discussed this in our team actually last week, that this focus on Black literacy does not hold any student down. The focus on early literacy, does not hold any student down. It is a strategy that supports students with disabilities, our English language learners, our advanced learners, and our biliteracy learners. Gabby's going to talk a little bit how foundational skills for biliteracy are actually a little bit different, but there's still a science to it, and we have to pay attention to that. And I'd also like to say that the science of reading and what we're going to talk about by no means disregards the love of learning, right? This gives students the skills that they need to enjoy and love learning and love reading. It does not mean drill and kill. Instead, it promotes confidence. It's rooted in both decoding and word recognition and also language proficiency that leads to comprehension. We still believe that children need high quality read alouds and that it's important for children to engage in hearing literature with their teacher. And of course, always high quality independent reading texts are also important. So we see this as a both and in the way that we're teaching reading. It is both about high quality foundational skills as well as language acquisition that leads to comprehension. Next slide, please. So these are the big rocks, the big components of what we think our early literacy strategy will be composed of as we focus on the science of reading. As you can see at its center, it's an equity imperative. And as I said, moving from talk to action. We'll educate and partner with our entire community. We plan to have a task force, and I'll talk about that at the end of the presentation, where our purpose is really uplifting voices and talking to some experts, both in our community and across the nation. We want to learn from schools and from teachers who are piloting materials and using letters already. I did a presentation with the student services staff, about a month ago now, and so many of those folks out there are ready and actually are already doing this and are saying to us, it's about time that we widen the learning that's happening. We're going to talk about a phased approach, and we're going to show you what a phased approach could look like. We don't know if that's exactly right yet, but the message is there's a short and a long-term strategy here, and there's also a big culture shift, right? It's not just about the technical aspects of this and the stuff. It's also about the culture change and the adaptive piece of this that we want to think about moving forward. We wanted to work to identify measurements of success along the way. And I'm going to talk a little bit more in the presentation about this really exciting partnership that we're going to have with UW-Madison and the Dean of the Ed School, Diana Hess, and Gloria Ladson-Billings, who is willing, she is ready. She asked for our commitment to this. We are there with her, and we are honored to be partnering with her around what does culturally relevant pedagogy look like? How is the science of reading part of that? And how can we best train our teachers as they teach our children how to be readers? Next slide, please. So we wanted to be sure that when thinking about this, that we also included the larger impact of 4K through 12 impact. And the bullet points on this slide really sort of, they widen really where the conversations happen in a couple of different ways, right? This is also about strengthening the transition between our youngest 4-year-olds as they move into 5-year-old kinder, and strengthening that summer experience for them. And as we talked with secondary teachers, they talked about the importance of this text-based teaching and learning strategy, always grounding children in text and continuing to build vocabulary and provide time for students to talk to each other at the secondary level as well. We want part of this to be an increase in reading certified staff across the district who are qualified to diagnose and provide appropriate intervention. We want to also train our secondary reading interventions and special education staff. And we want to implement these grade level screeners, these short probes into skill areas that give us insight into how children are learning foundational skills. Next slide. Thank you, Barb. As I said before, we're going to be partnering with local experts, and we're really excited about this. Again, Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings will be working with us around professional learning and equity audit, curriculum development. So all of that is going to be happening very soon. And also working with Diana Haas on collaborating around teacher certification, teacher development support. We actually see this work around the science of reading as being a prerequisite for teachers before they start in Madison to actually have new teacher training on this before they even come to teach in the Madison schools. Next slide, please. So as we start to launch into the data slides, is data matters, right? And there's a story, as I said, in this. And I wanted to start with sort of this national trajectory that we're seeing with the data. So why are we focusing on early literacy? Data across the nation from the NAEP tests indicates to us that there are very sharp disparities in reading achievement for the student groups that are listed here. And we see those same performance trends for students who qualify for free and reduced lunch, have disabilities, or who are English language learners. There is a need nationwide. And as we pass the next set of slides off to Kaylee, our Executive Director of Curriculum and Instruction, she's going to give you a look at what data looks like in Madison, and then what data looks like for different subgroups. So Kaylee, I am going to turn it over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lisa. Again, I'm Kaylee Jackson, Executive Director of Curriculum and Instruction. And we are going to go on a data walk together. We can go on to the next slide. All right, so as Lisa just showed us and informed us, there are disparities across the nation, as NAEP is showing us, in student groups as it relates to literacy and comprehension. Those disparities we also see here in MMSD. So what you're looking at here is our PALS benchmark. PALS measures early literacy skills and development. And you see that we're already in kindergarten, first and second grade, seeing disparities in PALS benchmark readiness between all of our students and our Black and African American students. Next slide. In looking now, zoning in the same assessment, we're still looking at early literacy, which is what we're focusing on today. What we are zooming in on here is second grade. And what you can see here is that our top line, our orange, those are the performance of our white second graders on this PALS benchmark. And at the bottom, we see our blue line, which is our Black or African American students and their performance at second grade on our PALS early literacy benchmark. What this says to us is that we need to stay true to the course with our third goal in our strategic framework, which is really staying true to our goal around the performance of African American students and Black excellence. This slide here shows us where that gap lies in MMSD in second grade. Next slide. This is that same data with second grade. We're still looking at race and ethnicity, but it's giving us a clustered view so that we can see benchmark performance across time and across the years, still showing a disparity between our Black and our white students. Next slide. So NAEP told us, and this is the last slide that Lisa just had with us, NAEP told us that yes, there are disparities for Black students, for African American, for Hispanics, Latinx, but it's not just those populations of students, those race or ethnicities, but we're also seeing across the nation disparities between different populations of students. Again, that is true in MMSD. So what you're looking at here is those same disparities in kindergarten, first and second grade, but we're looking at how our ELL students, low income students, and students with special ed services are also underperforming as compared to all of our students in our benchmark readiness. Next slide. And so this is a really interesting slide and two very interesting and incredibly telling data points. This slide here illustrates the role early literacy plays in later reading proficiency. Okay, so in MMSD, our very own district, if a student does not meet the PALS or early literacy benchmark in second grade, they have a 47% chance of being reading proficient in grades 3 through 5 if they are not Black or African American. Okay, however, if they are Black or African American and they have not reached that second grade early literacy benchmark, then there's only an 18% chance that that Black and African American student is going to be reading proficient in grades 3 through 5. So this further drives home the point that we have to get early literacy right across the board, but even more so for our Black and African American students. Next slide. So now we shift gears just slightly and we look at MAP proficiency. We're no longer looking at the PALS screener, which is giving us information on early literacy, but now we're looking at comprehension, okay? And what we're seeing here in third, fourth, and fifth grade is even wider gaps between our students and our Black and African American students in our reading proficiency. Next slide. Again, we're going to zone in. We're looking at the same data. We're still looking now at proficiency in reading, but we're looking at third grade, and we're looking again at the disparities between our different racial and ethnic groups. Okay, and what you see here is, again, the difference between our orange line at the top, which is our white students, and then the performance of our Black students, and not only our Black students, but our Hispanic and Latinx students at the bottom of this graph here. And this is our proficiency for these ethnic groups at our third grade. Next slide. Again, this is the same data, the same exact numbers as we saw on the slide before, but it's giving us a clustered view again, further illustrating the gaps that we have right now in our district as it relates to reading proficiency in the early grade levels. Again, a further need to focus on our, you can go ahead to the next slide, on our third goal in our strategic framework, focusing on Black excellence and the performance of our African American students. So here we're still looking at MAP. Remember, MAP is, there was a linking study to predict proficiency. Okay, so again, just as the NAEP is telling us that there are disparities amongst not only Black and African American students and Hispanic students and Latinx, but also with our students who are ELL, low income, and special ed students. What you're seeing here is that there are still stark disparities between the grade level proficiency, the reading proficiency of all students and other students. And we're also, even with our all students, we're maxing out in 4th grade at 46% proficient, all students. Next slide. So we will pause here for questions for Lisa, myself, and our data team.
Kaylee, before we launch into questions, I want to say thank you for going through the data slides for our team here tonight. And want to just pause a minute to see if Dr. Jenkins would like to add anything before we open it up for some questions.
I think I'll reserve my comments for the end. Thank you, Kelly, and thank you too, Lisa. You guys did a very nice job of explaining not only what we have before us, but why we must move in the direction that we're going. Thank you so much for the way that you've laid this out.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you. Barb, when you get
Thank you.
oh, sorry, Lisa. Barb, when you get a chance, can you take us out of, sorry, Lisa, go ahead.
No, I'm all ready, Ananda. You go ahead and open it up for questions.
Okay, so I see Savian and Gloria.
Thank you. And we got a glimpse of this, especially some of the crosstabs in the annual report and the appendix, especially for Black students with IEPs. I'm wondering, you know, as we go about this phased implementation, the 40 to 46% benchmark that all of our students are meeting, we absolutely need to raise that standard.
Savian, you're breaking up.
Okay. I trailed off at.
Your second sentence.
Okay.
After you said that we saw it on the annual plan.
Got it. Yeah. And so obviously we want to have a universal goal of raising that 46%, which is below, 50 even. From your expertise and experience, are there strategies we can employ? So not only do we raise all boats, but we really target the groups where gaps already exist. So for example, we could raise all tides, but we may see, the gaps get larger because some groups accelerate faster than others. I'm just curious about your thoughts on that in general.
Yeah, that's a great question, Savian. I think first and foremost, what we need to do is arm ourselves with the language, right? And arm ourselves with the understanding and get in first to just teach the strategy, right? And teach the science of reading. I think first, when we do that and we are all speaking the same language, we have a common approach, we are truly staying true to the research, then we course correct along the way, right? We look at our data, we continue to look at the groups that are accelerating at a faster rate, and then we'll go in and do targeted, interventions and supports and all of that. But I think first and foremost, it's getting this approach and strategy throughout the district.
Gloria and then Nikki.
Thank you, Ananda. My question and concern is that, we've always known that early literacy is really brings positive outcomes, particularly for African American children. And I'm really happy to see that Dr. Jenkins is really driving this home. Like, this is one of his priorities. I mean, this is the first thing he said one of the first things he said during the process and when he come on board and he's moving through this. And I'm just wondering, like, why it's taken us so long. And when will we see, why now? Why not before? And when will we start seeing results? And my other part of the question is, what are we doing for the kids who we've lost? Those kids who are older, who are in our school system, middle school, and, you know, so that we capture and intervene. You know, I get the early literacy component, but also, is there an opportunity for us to really focus and intervene for the older children in our schools so we don't lose any more, particularly our African-American students?
Gloria, let me take part of this. And first of all, I want to say thank you for asking those questions. I think they're really important. And I'll start off with, you know, I think that the teachers that we have in MMSD, including myself as a principal, right, we were balanced literacy. You know, we believed in the balanced literacy approach, small group, whole group, independent time, where the small group time was very much focused on reading at a child's level. You know, you heard text reading level, you heard that a lot. And, you know, a child could be in the same text reading level group for a really, really long time and not have an opportunity to hear grade level vocabulary. So Savion, you asked a question earlier, and Gloria, this goes to your question too. This is about giving kids those strong foundational skills, right? Explicit structured phonics. And it's also about giving kids the strategies then, giving students the strategies to decode more complex texts, more complex words at their grade level. We always have to be sure there's an opportunity for children to engage with grade level vocabulary. When you keep students in those small groups that are only at their level, right, they don't get to hear as many words and they don't get exposure to as much vocabulary. And we know that students need lots and lots and lots of exposure so that they can practice and use those words with their classmates as well. So with that strong explicit phonics first, and those are skills. We know what those skills are. We know they need to be taught. We want to give them those strategies. And Gloria, you're right. There are some middle and high school students who don't have those strategies yet, right? And as a matter of fact, they move from grade to grade. They actually graduate from high school. And they develop coping strategies, but they develop the coping strategies actually sometimes of poor readers. You know, we tell kids, if you don't know a word, guess, right? You hear teachers saying, sweetie, cover up the word and guess. Or what do you think the word might be? And then what happens is you have children, right, that graduate high school, they move on to post-secondary, and they don't have the confidence and also don't have necessarily the skills base to go into credit-bearing classes. So they take, you know, pre-college English or pre-college math, which is non-credit bearing, and it's still at the same cost for families. Families continue to incur a financial cost. So we want to really be sure that we're developing our teachers K-12, because all of those folks have a place in this to bring students up to the bar around explicit structured phonics.
I'd like to also add a piece to this, and yes, those things that Lisa said. And as we're approaching this, and as you heard her lay out the part in terms of the training that will go on for the older students, in terms of what we're talking about with the science of reading, particularly those students who are receiving special services. The catch in this, and you heard Lisa talking about, we in our era come from this balanced literacy. Lucy Calkins, the guru on it, I had a conversation, about an hour-long conversation with her on Friday. And we were talking about it because she just made a shift in her thinking, or her practices, I should say. That's all good educators do. We do things, and then when you learn better, you do better. And we talked about this explicit phonics and the use of the science of reading at the earlier levels, which, if you go and look at her work now in practice, the queen of balanced literacy has too made a shift at the early level. And this is why we're talking about the science of reading. The difference with a lot of all of the groups that's been listed here that have been a part of marginalized populations not succeeding, that language, be it if you come from poverty, be it maybe a different language that you're coming from, not that those languages are negative in any kind of way, but it's just that expansiveness of the vocabulary. Also, when we talk about bringing in Gloria Ladson-Billings, the queen of culturally relevant pedagogy. This is not just about our children. This is about adults too, shifting in our thinking and understanding it and having a different level of appreciation. Not that our teachers have done a job, but well, just the bottom line is this. The evidence is there for itself that says that we have not, across the country, you saw the NAEP, you see it here in Madison. It's not a put down on anyone. This is an opportunity for us to take what we have not done and start doing it. And I believe here in Madison, with us intersecting with the work of the science of reading, still understanding what is the best of balanced literacy, but then intersecting that with the work of Gloria Ladson-Billings. And when you start talking about the culturally relevant pedagogy, that's going to be good, great work for everyone, you know. And so this would be a different way for Madison to do it. And I'm very excited about it. And we're going to bring the best minds of the university, the critics, as well as the supporters of this, because we don't just want to go 30 more years and find out that we've been doing something incorrect. So as when Lisa mentioned the task force is going to come together and keep the best practices in front of us as well. I'll stop there.
Great, thank you for that, Dr. Jenkins and Lisa. And just a quick follow-up. It sounds like, Dr. Jenkins, like that we're talking about targeted universalism, right? By, you know, I learned this through Nichelle, and I know Ali and Ananda are really familiar with this, right? Is it Jim Powell? You know, it's this concept where you're really focused your strategies to benefit all, right? But you're using these focused strategies. And I think that when you're talking about Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings coming, it is really a culturally relevant strategy that we're using, particularly for professional development for our teachers in teaching our Black and brown children. Is that correct?
That's part.
Okay.
Most things in the approach is yes, and that's a part of it. And the other part of this, everyone who knows Dr. Ladson-Billings knows this. She's a no-nonsense person. She's going to put it to you, and she's going to train you at the highest level and have the highest expectation. That coupled with the fact that we have an equity strategy, knowing historically that our Black children and brown children have not succeeded, we're coming together with intersecting with our high expectations of how we're going to move forward. And I will say this too. I will say Dr. Odom, okay, he talked about this, the late Dr. Odom. And for us, focusing in on Black children and the strategies that we needed to lift them up. When we start talking about the phonics, the whole phonemic awareness, the science of reading, it goes into our equity strategy of giving those children explicitly the tools that they need in terms of being able to compete and go beyond. And really, when you look at the NAEP data and our local data, even the white children who are high middle class benefits from these strategies we're talking about. Okay, I'm gonna stop right there.
Thank you. And I'm not gonna say anything else but this. Dr. Jenkins, thank you for bringing up John Odom and his passing. I think that if we can, Ananda, at the end of our meeting, if we can just do a moment of silence. He has been so, he has been critical of MMSD. He has pushed us to be better. And just, I just really would like the time to remember him in silence tonight.
Yeah, no, for sure, Gloria. Thanks for reminding us. I think there is a part of your question, Gloria, that I really appreciate, which is also like, okay, we had a lot of intellectual capacity before 2020. We have had a lot of plans. We had a pretty intense data analysis. What is different now in the way in which we are framing, and what was the root cause that had prevented us from achieving what we are planning to achieve now?
Yeah, that's exactly it, right? And I think that's where my line of my questioning came to.
I think that's a great question. Let me jump in on that one, because this whole world of reading, and I'm telling you, I used to be the champion of balanced literacy, right? Just trying to get children to read. and particularly Black and brown children, just seeing the disparities over my 30 plus years career. And we all, a number of us, took great pride in balanced literacy. Watching it, seeing some children come into schools with certain skill sets already continue to thrive. Here in Madison, it's been an age-old discussion. We have produced more National Merit semifinalists, if you go back and add it up over all the years, at the same time in the same building. We had children who were some of the lowest performing students in the country or in the world with reading. So now we're coming to a new understanding. And I encourage everyone out there listening and everyone here, if you have not taken the time to try to understand the science of reading, please do so. Now, don't get caught up with just science. We always say the science, right? But these strategies we're talking about are very specific in building the phonics. And it's not just that in isolation. We're going to give children choices too. Individuals who have been critics have said, well, the science of reason doesn't give children. That's not so. But we're very early on being very explicit about how we try to increase the phonemic awareness, the delivery of instructions, teachers understand this is not just about children fixing children. This is about us shifting too. We were the ones who've done this. We're the ones who've done it, not just the children. The children come to us as they are, but we have to shift our thinking. So Ananda, that's what's happening now. You're seeing this wave. It's a movement of individuals understanding and wanting to do something about it. We're very fortunate to be here in Madison, where it's a big discussion, and you have the teachers, a number of administrators who are interested in this, but we're still going to take our time and engage everyone, have the intellectual discourse, and we're making a commitment. That goal 3, you can't find that in many places across the country. Where we say Black children and youth will excel. Not many people are that bold. Neil Heinemann said to me, be bold. Well, this is bold. We're going after this. We're going after that. And I am willing to die on the cross over it, period. If it means the end of it, that's fine. Because there's no reason that children, all children, should not be able to read. It is their right. As being an American citizen, it is their right to be able to read. And it's time for us to do something about it.
Dr. Jenkins, may I just, because I can't help myself, you guys are singing my song here. I just want to answer to the powerful questions that have been posted and say, like, why has it taken us so long? Why now? And I'm just going to tell you like a little story. Kaylee, please don't let me go over 40 seconds because, I could do this for days. I am a general education teacher, a bilingual teacher, a world language teacher, an ESL teacher. I have 7 licenses. I am a professional student. And I can tell you that this concept, this idea of the science of reading is not something that has been readily available to all humans that have been in education for always and forever. I can tell you honestly, as a human being that became a reader in English later on in my life, and then decided to be brave enough to have children educational system that I did not understand, that I have cried over this. Because I cannot have one more person tell me that my kids just need one more summer to grow up. Am I right? Like one more summer so they can mature like if they were fruit so that they can become readers. Am I right? Because what they require is something that is very explicit and that it takes, this has not been readily available for all of us. Many of us have been able to have 3, 4, 5, 7 licenses and having to go into like Alice in a hole and look for more and more information and go to the reference of the reference of the reference of the reference to be able to find something that has a scientific backing, something that has been true and tried. So I'm going to talk more about that in my slide, but I just couldn't help myself.
Thank you, Gabby, and Nikki and Chris.
I appreciate the discussion. I'm wondering on the PALS on the not PALS, excuse me, on the MAP scores with the 16% proficiency for individuals with disabilities. Is that the predicted rate, or is that the actual rate?
That is the actual rate, Nikki.
That's what I was afraid of. And is that, and that's not solely because of, for example, nonverbal. It's, I know certain ways.
Yeah,
of
if
testing
it is a
can't be
nonverbal, a student that has, you know, needs related to nonverbal, that would be a separate assessment. It wouldn't be as measured by the PALS.
I was afraid of that.
Nikki, it's why we're getting after it, right? I see the commitment on your face. It is why we're getting after it. And that addition to the law not that long ago, you know, that children who have reading goals in their IEP can receive those services from a reading specialist, right?
Exactly.
We want to be sure that students with IEPs also have access to highly trained individuals around reading and around diagnosing reading difficulties. So we want to train up our cross-categorical teachers and reading specialists so that we are all partnering with our children around this.
And one other thing, the science of reading, I'm sorry, Nikki, if I may, it also helps the students with dyslexia. And
Yes.
even when I talked to Ms. Calkins, we were on the same page. And that's what I told, I'm not looking to disagree with her. I'm just looking to get the best of her thinking of whatever's going to work with children. So we're not looking for any one person or one answer. We're looking for the best of it. But when you talk about dyslexia, this is big for children who has dyslexia. And you know, and Ananda, you asked why now? We're now just learning more about dyslexia. That wasn't something that we screened for early enough, and the children received the services early enough. And now with this, we're going early after it. And I just know it's going to make a big difference for us.
And I'm thanking you guys for accepting the Orton-Gillingham method as part of the teaching, because that's huge for individuals with dyslexia. And for a long time, people like, that's not how kids learn to read. It's like, how a large group did and still do. So I just appreciate that.
Thank you, Nikki. I see Christina Gomez-Schmidt and then Ali Mudro.
Thanks, Ananda. And let me know if you can't hear me, because my internet connection's a little unstable. That we've already experienced that tonight. So just stop me if you can't hear me. I just wanted to say that I really appreciate this comprehensive approach and this presentation about early literacy that is so much more than adopting a new reading curriculum, which is where we started this work. And that second slide that you had that showed the comprehensive approach from learning from within our schools, from teachers who are already using new strategies grounded in the science of reading, to the larger work of a task force, partnerships with UW, and reaching out to engage the larger community and community partners in this work. It's all so important. And I'd just like to say this really has the potential to be transformative in helping students have access to learning with literacy as the key skill and the foundation for that access. And so I'm very excited about this work. And I have a few questions around the data. I also appreciated the presentation of this data and looking from the PALS data to the map and by different subgroups and looking at the gaps visually the way you showed it. I guess one of the questions that I have is that we've seen that there's a disconnect between PALS data and map data. And I know we have talked before about changing PALS to a different measurement for the K-2. So I'm wondering if you could update us on where that's at. And I'm wondering if that we have considered using maybe the MAP primary, which is a K-2 that aligns with the 3 to 5 grade level map that's available.
Hi, Chris. Let me get to some of these questions that you had. And just, I'm really thrilled that you're also interested in partnering with us. I'm really looking forward to that. So we did, you are right, we replaced PALS with FastBridge That's our replacement. And as an early literacy screener, it's actually the first year we have used it. It's also the screener that we use that informs any sort of IEP or disability around a certain content area. So we use that also. It's also used as a progress monitoring tool. But, you know, the first year with any kind of new assessment, right, you have bumps in the road a little bit. So it's our first year with FastBridge. We've had some bumps in the road, and we're in the middle of a pandemic. So we have tried, we have had some bumps, we are learning. We've had lots of other conversations back and forth about which subtest is the best one to use. It is interesting though, you know, some of the information that we're getting from FastBridge is based, right? It is based on the science of reading. And we have some teachers that are trying to figure out how to use that. So the new assessment is actually telling us something about what might be happening in schools or what might be missing from schools. So more to come on this, Chris. It's a little bit of an uneven implementation. I'm going to be totally honest. It's brand new. We have grace with that as well. I will say that all of our student services teams have been trained in FastBridge because of the relationship that they have with also psychologists, social workers, and cross-categorical teachers. But this measure, FastBridge, is it's similar to Dibbles, what you might have, or AimsWeb, what we used before. So more to come on this. We're going to do a presentation later in the year on the comprehensive assessment system. But I'm going to be honest, you know, we're working through it, and we're working through it together. Lots of partnership with MTI and staff out in the field on that.
Great. And I would like to recognize staff who are trying to implement this new assessment in the midst of a pandemic when your students are not in your classroom and you're trying to do this virtually for every student out there. So that work is appreciated. And I know it'll look different once we're able to bring students back into the school buildings.
Mm-hmm.
My last question, I just wanted to highlight what Gloria asked about too, is wondering if there are applications to of the science of reading fundamentals that are applicable to the middle and high school learners who are really needing to boost their literacy skills. And I know it got mentioned in a few of the slides, but is that work going to happen in tandem with what we're doing at the K-5 level? I just don't want it to take a decade for us to catch up. We have a lot of learners who, we have a responsibility to help them with literacy skills.
I'm with you on that. And we do have to work together with those secondary teachers to also, number one, build the awareness that it does matter, right? And we want them to know that and get that training. You'll see a little of that in the slides that are coming up.
Great.
I also want to say that, you know, lots of for a long time, our primary strategy at middle and high school was System 44 and Read 180. We didn't necessarily go to the pedagogy or the science of reading. We went to those two interventions, and actually, when implemented with fidelity, they actually do get great results with kids. But what happened was the Read 180 System 44, it was a struggle to fit that into a master schedule when there were so many other options for kids. So more to come on that, more discussions on that, but you know, we shouldn't be relying on a technology tool like is in Read 180 System 44 is our whole approach to the science of reading, right? The most important piece in a classroom is the teacher, and a highly skilled teacher, and that's what we owe to our secondary teachers as well. And right, we're learning more. We know more, we do better, materials are better now, so definitely that has to be a priority for us.
Yeah, and I would also like to add to that, Chris, yes, everything that Lisa just said, but also we have to be very careful with our capacity and what all we're putting on teachers at the same time. We don't want to wait 10 years for the students to improve, but how many things can we demand, and are we prepared to give the appropriate professional development, the resources, the support? When we think about our budget, we are going to have some strong conversations in our next budget season about what we're going to do, but we have to provide that support for the teachers in doing this. We can have all the expectations in the world, but if we don't give them the appropriate support so that they can manage it, we're still in a pandemic. we're still trying to make sure that we take care of our students and our staff during all of this. And overload is overload.
Thank you so much. Dr.
Delicate balance, I'm saying.
Thank
So,
you.
I'm gonna go Ali and then Chris Caruzzi, and then we're gonna finish up this presentation.
Thank you so much, everybody, for the presentation. And I really appreciate, Gloria, the strength of your questions in terms of kind of our long-term approach and really what it looks like to have different outcomes. Lisa, one of the things I want to emphasize in my comments is just that you continue to talk about how we're going to bring the strengths from other approaches to literacy into our new approach. So we are not just kind of abandoning what we've learned, but kind of bringing the accumulation of sound strategies to our students, which is a really exciting place to be. And allows for us to kind of really maximize the benefits of our prior investments in early learning and literacy. It is not lost on me that the students we are most likely to suspend in elementary school are the students who are most likely to struggle with reading. And so if we are, and suspension is one kind of discipline, right? There's a lot of kinds of discipline that certain students are more likely to be subjected to than others, Black students in particular, including things like not being able to see the board because you're turned around and looking at the corner, or being sent into another classroom to tap out or calm down. This idea of high expectations and low expectations, it seems as though we have low expectations academically and high expectations when it comes to behavior for Black students who are 4, 5, 6 years old. How are we, using this data in a holistic way to reshape the experiences of our students, and how are we, looking to other gaps that are, part of identity, right? Like the fact that our girls are less likely to be recognized as talented and gifted in the area of math, right? So how are we learning from addressing this gap in a way that it allows for us to address all gaps academically and make sure that a student's identity doesn't make them more likely to get suspended, doesn't make them less likely to be seen as talented and gifted in the area of arithmetic.
Mm-hmm. Ali, I was thinking about this today as I was preparing my notes for the board meeting, and thinking about how important it is that our children are confident learners, and they can, they can solve problems on their own. And they also, once they know how to read, once they can solve and figure out complex text, grade level text, their world is open to them. They have all these opportunities and they feel confident, and they might actually find out they have an interest or a talent in an area that they never knew they had before. We want to give students the capacity to, as they encounter more rigorous words, as they get to first and second and third grade, and the rigor of the standards gets more difficult, if we help students to feel confident with that, their world can open up and they can have all kinds of different opportunities and feel confident about those things, right? We want our children to see themselves as good readers. And we want our children to know, what are the skills that a good reader possesses, and that they can read to learn more. So it's not just about learning to read, but they can read to learn more, and they can be excited about what interests them. So it's the opportunities and the doorways that open for children, and as they feel better about themselves, about the real work that they're doing, and they're not continually struggling with the language. And there's language in math, right? Some of our young women that don't want to or don't feel confident in math, it may be because they're having a hard time figuring out the language that goes with the math. So I think that the possibilities are endless, and I'm looking here at my team. Kaylee, is there anything you might want to add to that?
Yeah, I think, Ali, you bring up an incredible point. And I think one of the things that Dr. Jenkins mentioned is we want to be sure to do this well, right? And that's one of the reasons why we have a phased approach, and one of the reasons why we're taking our time and we don't want overload. And part of that is it's changing some of our practices, right? And like it's challenging some of our mindsets, and it's challenging some of our beliefs. And so Allie, when I think about like, well, what would I do? What would I want to do with this information as a building principal, as a building leader? I would want to look at this data and I'd want to triangulate that with some behavior data. Right. And I would want to like challenge the mindsets and challenge like discipline strategies and challenge the approaches that we're using in the classroom and seeing where those intersections are. So I think it's just that, right? I think it's putting this information in front of the board, in front of our leadership teams, both at central office and within our schools. And it is asking those challenging questions of find the why. Right? Find the why, find the relationship, and therefore, what are we doing about it? But you're absolutely right. Yeah.
Kaylee and Lisa, I want to thank you very much for speaking to that. And I have one more question. I was going to direct that specifically at Kaylee and Gabby. Looking at the modification of this curriculum and how we will modify this curriculum to work with students who are hearing impaired, students who, access literacy from all different points. What does it look like and mean to modify early literacy for students with disabilities as we move in this direction?
I actually think that Amanda would be best to answer that question for you.
Hi, Amanda.
Hi, Holly. So I apologize. I was having to take care of my dog and of course caught the last 6 words of that. Can you go ahead and rephrase
Yes,
that?
I completely understand. We're all juggling our home reality with this meeting. So thank you for being transparent about that. And the question was, how are we modifying this curriculum to meet the needs of our students with disabilities as we move in this direction? How are we going to make sure our students who might struggle for whatever reason to access phonics specifically are being supported to the greatest possible extent?
Oh, so such a great question. And I'm so happy because I could kind of, like to Gabby's point earlier, go on about this for days. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Assistant Director of Professional Learning and Student Services. And I've had a variety of roles, but right now on my team, lead this work all the time around how do we keep our focus around high quality core materials and also ensure that our students with disabilities are getting targeted instruction to deliver or to meet those skills that they need so that they can be engaged in that core text. Similar to your point, Ellie, around, to me, when I think about kids being kicked out of classrooms, it's often engagement, right? And that you can't do something that you don't have the skills to do if you're not being taught how to access it, because no one likes to do things that you can't do. None of us, even as adults, we don't like doing things we haven't been taught or that we aren't good at. And so what we've been focusing on within my team is thinking, so we've actually implemented letters through student services first, with really focusing on teams with both special ed teachers as well as then classroom teachers to make this work as enriched as we can, seeing that we have to have it in core instruction and that then our special ed teachers are able to also take that same knowledge and understanding to apply it within specially designed instruction when they're working in small groups and one-on-one with students. And so as someone, I've done letters 1 through 4 this last year. 3 of my team members have done the facilitator training this past summer. We have tons of team conversation around this and really see and are just excited that this really is for all kids and is especially supportive for our students with disabilities who we know need that direct instruction, opportunities for practice and feedback along with that connection to text so that they can be successful. So this is very adaptable to a variety of needs. And then we do have kind of a different range of programs and tools that we already use, and the letters knowledge will only lift our staff ability to use them in more targeted ways so that they can be as successful as we hope they can.
Amanda, I loved your answer to that question. That was entirely the information I needed. So thank you so much. That was very, very helpful. My last question is for Dr. Jenkins, and it's really about the future of early literacy. As literacy and the nature of literacy shifts and changes, how are we going to make sure that we're not just kind of keeping up with yesterday's metrics, not just kind of reflecting on the data we've produced previously, but also pushing our students to have new relationships with literacy as literacy becomes more inclusive of things like computer coding and opportunities within technology, how are you as the leader of this district going to make sure we continue to move forward and push forward and make sure our kids have skills that are relevant for the future in terms of literacy? And that's it for my questions.
Yeah, that's a great question too, Ali. I mean, I just think as leaders and as a longtime educator and just knowing when things come along, you heard me say I was a balanced literacy champion for years. But when you learn better, as Maya Angelou said, right, then you do better. But it's a matter of us being willing to do better. And at some point, we have to know we have to continue to look forward. The children that we're going to get tomorrow may be a little bit different than the children that we get today. And then we have to say, are we still relevant? Are we still meeting the needs of the children? We often try to meet the needs of the adults. And we have to stop that. We have to truly say the children that we're getting, they're going to be so digital ready. The children who are just not even conceived yet, they will come into this world with a whole different level of being able to be a learner like we've never been before. So, and this is what we do in education. We have to understand the root of what are the fundamentals, but yet give our children the skill set so that they can pivot as necessary as our society. The jobs of tomorrow, we don't know those jobs in full. So if we're just saying what we're doing today is going to be good enough for 10 years, 20 years out, that may not necessarily be so. But today, what we do know that what we have done and invested billions of dollars in is no longer what's needed for all children. And if we continue to do it, we're going to continue to have these gaps persist. So that's what I say. We have to give the resources and continue to be cutting edge around the world, not just in Madison. Take the science off the hill from UW and other institutions who are willing to partner with us. Take what our parents are saying and look at our youngest learners and then prepare for that. Where could they be 40 years from now, 50 years from now? Perpetually learning, that's what I would say.
Ms. Carusi?
Yes, I really appreciate this conversation and this presentation. I just have one question about the data, which I'd like to get clarified if possible. If you look at the two slides that you presented on PALS benchmarks and MAP proficiency, across the board, you have fewer kids scoring proficient on MAP than you have meeting their PALS benchmarks. However, the percentage, if you compare white kids and black kids, you have a much lower percentage of kids, black kids, who meet their PALS benchmarks but then score proficient on MAP than you have of white kids who score proficient or meet their PALS benchmarks and then score proficient on MAP. Specifically, if you look at the numbers, I think it's 87% of white second graders are meeting their PALS benchmarks and 64% are scoring proficient on MAP, which is a 23% drop. And if you look at black students, 56% are meeting their PALS benchmarks, but only 17% are scoring proficient on MAP, which is a 39% drop. And that's almost not quite, but almost double the drop of white students. I'm wondering if that's telling us something about the tests. I mean, you've got kids taking the same test in second grade and the same test in third grade, but a lot fewer black children are scoring proficient on the MAP test, which makes me wonder about bias in the MAP test. And I think that's a really important question to put out there, because as we roll out a new curriculum, we're going to have to measure the impact of that curriculum. And we need to make sure the tools we're using to measure that impact aren't biasing our children of color. So I just thought I'd just put that out there. I'd love to know if you guys have thoughts about what that drop is about and what it means.
Andrew, do you want to start off there? I have a
Sure.
couple thoughts too, but I'll let you go first.
Thank you, Lisa. So not being introduced earlier this evening, Andrew Statz, Executive Director of Research Accountability and Data Use. And on the data side, we also have joining us tonight, Dr. Oriana Iversol. She is the Director of Research and terrible sound tonight. Yes, I am sorry about that.
If you turn off your camera, it might work better.
I will try that. Thank you. It has been a struggle all day, so hopefully this helps.
No, it didn't.
I was afraid of. Okay. I'll tell you
Andrew, while you're gathering your potential, I can start here a little bit. PALS is an early literacy. It was our early literacy screener, right? It measures specific skill areas in literacy that children need in each grade level. MAP, MAP measures different items. And if you're not sound in your early literacy strategies and your early literacy skills, your comprehension on a map test and how you're going to do on that is going to be impacted. I would also say, Chris, you know, we don't have another measure other than MAP to use right now. So as we look at our comprehensive assessment system, there are some things that we have to figure out, right? We have to figure out what are good standards aligned assessments that tell us about our next moves in the classroom. What are good formatives that we're using to tell us next moves in the classroom? But I think the message is, if a student does not have the skills on PALS, that they are going to fare worse on the MAP test with comprehension. And that is actually a predictor there. So Andrew, do you want to see if you're back on track here?
Hey, we also could have Dr. McGregor go ahead and weigh in while we're waiting on him to come back in. Dr. McGregor.
I am able to use my phone, so when you're ready.
Yeah, I would also ask us to look at, when we think of any assessment, as one particular data point that tells how well our system is aligned in terms of instruction and learning. And we also have to be mindful of that even the assessments that allow students to get into, say, college or into an articulated skill trade or what have you, they all have a certain amount of bias. And so we still try to have a teaching and learning system that performs so well that students can be successful in these assessments as a residual, understanding that there is built-in bias throughout any assessment, but we should still be working in such a way that more students can show that they can do the work of the standards as a residual of good teaching and learning, not that the one assessment is the total answer for everything. And so that's why I would always tell people to be mindful of those things when you're looking at assessment in a holistic manner.
All right, thank you, Dr. McGregory. How do I sound now? Thank you. All right, so the workaround here is apparently my phone. So using multiple technologies, I'd like to start over. So good evening. Thank you for taking up this item tonight, and I'm pleased to join you. I'm Andrew Statz, Executive Director of Research Accountability and Data Use, and also joining us is Dr. Oriana Eversole, Director of Research and Program Evaluation. A couple of things here are actually technical as it relates to the types of assessments and the way that we look at them. So PALS is a screener. Its intention is to identify students that need interventions. They are known to need assistance, and PALS is the screener that provides you with the information. So in that sense, it's one bar. When we look at our MAP results, that is a prediction of proficiency on an upcoming state assessment. And when we look at our MAP proficiency, we look at two proficiency bands. So that is proficient and advanced. So if we are seeing a difference between the PALS administration's results and the MAPS administration's results, the very first thing to consider is that they are different types of assessments for different purposes, and then therefore have different thresholds. Because we look at proficient and advanced as it relates to MAP results, we typically do not include then basic results in that snapshot. So what you're likely seeing here, if you do see a drop that is larger for one student group than another from PALS to MAP, and it's because more students then, a disproportionality of students are landing in the basic category, just south of the proficiency cut score. So some of this is the effect of the assessments themselves and what they're for, as well as the way that we've looked at them historically.
I appreciate your bringing up cut scores. And I really think as we move forward with coming up with a plan to over the long term, assess the impact of whatever reading program we choose and whatever broader interventions we choose, making sure that the tests themselves are not putting children at a disadvantage, I think is important. And cut score could be a part of that. So thanks. I appreciate that explanation.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Andrew, for this comprehensive review on assessment. Savian, you want to say a final word? Julia, do you have any comment or question?
I'm good right now, thank you.
Thank you. Savian, say your final words, and then we'll move on.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to highlight Gloria and Ali's question, particularly with Black students in the classroom. And just want to say how impressed I am at Dr. Jenkins and the team for bringing in Dr. Lesson Billings and members of the community to make sure that this is culturally relevant. Because the other piece of this is engagement for Black students in the classroom. And if we can also use this as a window of opportunity to improve the way we engage with particularly our Black students or students with disabilities, I think that can be a game changer down the line as well, especially when we look at the data and the literature showing that, if a student not functionally literate and not engaged in the classroom, what that means in terms of the school to prison pipeline as well. And as a final note, just wanted to in the early grades, so I got that explicit phonics instruction.
Thank you so much, Savian. I think we were able to capture most of what you share, and I really apologize everyone for the technology. Lisa, would you like to wrap us up on this presentation, please?
You bet. We're going to move forward now that we've gone through the data, right? And the purpose of that was to add to why this is an equity imperative, part of our why and our narrative about where we're going. And I'm going to turn it over to Carletra Stanford, our elementary chief of schools, and she's going to talk a little bit about what we're hearing from some of the experts in the field and what some of the big points around the research are when it comes to the science of reading.
Thank you, Lisa. Good evening, everyone. We just wanted, as Lisa said, to highlight some experts. Timothy Shanahan is one of those reading researchers that we have been looking at some of the best practices that he's suggesting, and just wanted to lift this quote from him that states that research is the only tool we have that allows us to determine the kinds of teaching most likely to advance our students' learning. Common sense and past experience are useless before such questions. And so really just lifting that to say that we know that what we have done in the past has not exactly hit the mark of where we want to be for closing those gaps. And we are moving forward by using that research of the experts in the field of reading as our guide in examining best practices. So as Lisa stated earlier, we must know what the research says and then be able to apply that to our practices. Next slide, please. And we know that you have seen this before. This is some of the research findings that we've presented to the board, and just wanted to put those in the space again today. And essentially the research states that reading is something that must be taught. And we also know that there must be intentionality within our approach. So intentionality around our focus on the early grades, knowing that early intervention is critical as we understand the role early literacy plays in students meeting reading proficiency. Intentionality in explicit reading instruction, specifically with reading foundational skills, and also intentionality with our materials alignment and approach to instruction. So in the next few slides, Gabby is going to delve further into the power of the science of reading. Next slide.
Thank you so much, Carletra. I literally got the best slides of the whole slide deck. So let's talk about why the science of reading and why is this so powerful. So the first thing that I want to do is to orient us in looking at the graphic representation that is currently on the screen. And that is the graphic representation for a theoretical model that is commonly known as the simple view of reading. And the simple view of reading is of critical importance as it relates to the science of reading, because it conceptualizes reading comprehension as the product of two predictable variables. And I want to say that again because it's really important. It is saying that we can predict reading comprehension if we attend to the first one being word recognition. And word recognition is defined as the accurate and fast retrieval of decoded words. And then we're going to take this word recognition and then we're going to multiply it, like if it was a mathematical formula, with the second, that is language comprehension. And this is language comprehension that is beyond vocabulary. This is language comprehension that attends to the true linguistic processes that are involved in the comprehension of oral language. So please really think about this as a mathematical formula, and in a multiplication, if either one of the pieces, either the word recognition or the language comprehension were 0, then reading comprehension would then not happen. So if a student cannot decode a word, they cannot comprehend it. All right. And if a student cannot comprehend a spoken word, let's say the student have decoded, but they don't have a meaning to attach to the word, they're still not comprehending it. So it is important for us as we're thinking about the science of reading to understand that we're attending to A and B, and A and B are equally important. What is absolutely beautiful and is very powerful and feels really new in relationship to the science of reading is that the simple view of reading is true for monolingual settings, but it is also true for multilinguistic educational environments. So those of us that have the great pleasure of being able to be literate and reading with comprehension in more than one language are still using these two variables. And monolinguals are doing exactly the same thing. So since the simple view of reading was conceived in around 1986 to now, it has been proved to the test. And this theoretical model now has been scientifically tested to understand that it's a true model for effective teaching for all students. Can we do the next slide, please? Thank you. So why is the science of reading so powerful? Okay, so the science of reading is really, really powerful because of a couple things. Perhaps the first of those things is that it explicitly calls the teaching of foundational skills as an important part of a robust reading program. And he's saying that it's not only very important and it needs to occur, but he's telling us what are the characteristics of this teaching of foundational skills. And it is telling us that the teaching must be systemic. That means that we're going to have a sequence of phonics. Then it's going to be a progression from the simplest to the most complex that is going to include review and repetition within the scope. That is going to be explicit and completely intentional. It also said that we're going to provide the students with sufficient time to be able to practice. It says, and it calls out for us to be very intentional in saying, we are not going to tell kiddos about foundational skills, but we are going to engage in a true pedagogical practice of productive struggle. We're not going to tell kids, we're going to engage with them. And to be able to do that, we must interact. This has to be interactive and it needs to support them. So what you're seeing in the slide, you're seeing under word recognition, you're seeing these blue strands, and it's explaining what is it that it means. When we're saying word recognition, we're talking about phonological awareness, we're talking about decoding, we're talking about sight recognition. And we're saying that all of these strands need to intertwine with the red strands that are the language comprehension. And as I said, we're going to go beyond vocabulary and we're going to talk about background knowledge, about vocabulary, of course, about language structures, about verbal reasoning. And that these strands are going to intertwine to make this rope. And that this rope, that is also known in theory as the reading rope, is going to then allow us for fluent reading and for reading that it is attentive to to comprehension, which is ultimately what we want. Could we go to the next slide? So how are we going to get here? So I was sharing a little bit early that despite the fact that the science of reading is not something that it is new, it is not something for which all of us that have engaged in a professional practice in education have had access to. So letters is a professional development opportunity that is part of our long-term commitment for our teachers, our students, and our community at large. It is important to note that letters is not a curriculum. So it's not a curriculum, but rather it is a way for us to increase our collective professional knowledge and skills to improve upon our pedagogical practice. And that these skills and knowledge that we are going to gain through engaging with letters are going to be flexible. So as we continue in our journey and as, years come happening, that these skills are going to be able to use regardless of the curriculum that we have in front of us, so long this curriculum is standards aligned. So this is an investment, and we want to be honest about it. And this investment is going to require for teachers to engage with us in online instruction that is going to be about 1 or 2 hours per week for each of the grade levels. And we're proposing that this online practice is going to be paired with face-to-face training that is going to be about 4 hours a month. And that overall, we're looking about a 100 hours year investment in our teachers. And I am going to pass it along to, I think, back to Lisa.
Okay, next slide, please. Thank you, Gabi, for explaining to us where we are going with letters training and what that system looks like as we prepare teachers. And again, hearkening back to what Dr. Jenkins said, this is what we're talking about around capacity and phasing the work. We want to be sure we do it really well, knowing that there are 2 separate phases for the letters training, and we want to really build a culture that is really founded on the science of reading in our earliest classrooms, and then all the way through 2nd grade or secondary education. So I'm going to chime in here a little bit and talk just a little bit about what happened with our core materials adoption that we started last year. So one of the things that we did last year when we started to look at core materials is we engaged in empathy interviews, surveys, and focus groups. And MTI worked with us on this. We actually trained a cadre of people to administer the empathy interviews, and we learned some things from our children and our families and our staff. The number one thing we learned was we needed more time to hear the voices and lift the voices of our reading experts, our community partners, and our staff. They wanted more time to engage in this dialogue. Our teachers wanted the resources and the training. If you look back at all of those comments that teachers made, many of the comments directly go back to high quality, structured, explicit phonics, and they wanted to learn more about it and do more with that in classrooms. Schools told us they wanted standards aligned, research-based, and historically accurate core materials. We knew, and I know that we talked about this last year when we were all together, that there were some materials in our classrooms at the elementary, middle, and secondary that were actually historically inaccurate. And so we wanted to be sure that we heard that, and we are working with Gloria Ladson Billings to develop and take a look at, do an equity audit of our materials. Our parents wanted to know more about how their child was learning to read, right? They wanted to know too, how are we going about it? How can I help my child at home? They actually wanted some specifics about some skills they could be helpful with or some ways that their child was actually learning, right? And then families are talking to their child about what they're doing in reading and how they're learning. And then we also learned that our students deserve and our families wanted their child to engage with grade level texts and grade level vocabulary. We heard from families that they did not want their children held down. They wanted the expectations high with support. And that's the other piece, that language development that Gabi was talking about, that you have that along with a really strong foundational skills program leads to reading comprehension. Next slide, please. All right, so you're all gonna have to bear with me through these next couple slides. And in complete transparency, in the pacing that we talked about, boy, there were some meetings where we sped the pacing up. There were some meetings where we redid the slides and we slowed back a little bit. So we're here today to tell you this is an example of what we're thinking around pacing. And we want to talk with more teachers in the task force to inform this. So there are some things that we left intentionally open a little bit so that we can try things and see how they go. But you will see sort of the complexity of this work and the different job-alike groups and folks in the district that we need to bring along. And my main message here is that we have to be thoughtful. We have to think about capacity, and we have to think about high quality implementation and professional development over just doing everything all at once. So these next couple of slides detail what we did in 1920. So Amanda Kidwell, who shared with you a little bit around the special education use of foundational skills, she and a colleague have put together the Science of Reading and Letters training as early as last year. And you can see the professional development that occurred. And then the tandem work that was done in our core materials selection process that we began. So we did the empathy interviews, we did some data collection about what people said, and we're still doing, and we started last year, a small pilot in 2 schools for EL education and the foundational skills components and lessons in that set of materials. Where are we at now? We're continuing the cohorts of training. Some are in the new units 1 through 4. Some are continuing with units 5 through 8 of the letters training. And you can see that LVM and Gompers are doing some of that work, and those 2 principals will be sharing with you shortly. We also have principals, central office, and instructional coaches. Excitingly, we're going to have a literacy symposium starting this summer and moving forward. I am really excited about this targeted work, and we're excited to be working with Gloria Ladson-Billings to put forth a professional development series that is really valuable and energizing and builds that culture for this work. And then we're also planning a principal letters training this summer. As we move forward with core materials, our EL education pilots are continuing. And thanks to Gabi and her savvy skills in working with some of these vendors, we think that we're going to secure a new pilot for our bilingual classrooms around foundational skills for a few teams that are ready. And then we want to revisit and get some more feedback into a draft core materials process and timeline. And I would like to say just at this point, and it might be obvious, but the primary work, the first work on this is the culture shift and the professional development and the capacity building. One set of core materials is never going to be perfect. One set of core materials is never going to be the answer. We have a scope. That's what we work and teach by. Core materials are tools and resources. Nothing is perfection. We will do our very, very best, but we will be working together over the next couple of years to finalize this. Next slide, please. So this is an example of 21-22. Again, there's an asterisk. This is depending on budget. We know this will require a serious commitment of local funding and resources. So this is an example of how we build that capacity over the years with coaches, starting off with K2 teacher teams, early adopter school teams, a symposium, and continuing with awareness and training at the secondary level. And then you can also see a bit of an expansion around core materials and a timeline for a phased approach. Next slide. So now we're 2 years out in 22-23, hopefully not in the same pandemic state that we are in now, again, dependent on budget. Again, dependent on investment of time and talent and funding. You can see the staff groups continuing with multiple layers of training, another symposium, and then another phased approach for core materials. So this is an example of what our best thinking is, and we want to talk more over the year with you, our partners on the board, our task force and staff to really get this fleshed out. But there's a lot of detail here that will take coordinating, and we really want to do it well. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're going to take some time and have Sarah Larson, principal at Alvium, and Jackie Smith, principal at Gompers, to share the work that they're doing with their teaching staff and how they as leaders are talking about this and leading their work in schools. So I will turn it over to our principals.
Hi, everybody. Good evening. I am Jackie Smith, the principal at Gompers. I thank you all for taking this time tonight to listen to kind of our journeys towards this work. They're definitely still a work in progress, but I'm excited to share with you what we're doing. So at Gompers, our work began with an unwavering commitment to educational equity. And high quality literacy instruction is one of the most equitable practices for students. Our work over the last few years has been aligned with creating a culture of learning, which first includes leader learning, then with SBLT and teacher teams. We are always striving to do right by our students. All of this learning and collaboration has also been supported through our partnership with the Achievement Network. An area where we continued to learn was around the calibration of what Common Core literacy aligned instruction looked like and making sure that we were incorporating the shifts of the Common Core into our instruction. Our main work around this has been a shift to text-based literacy approach. At team meetings, we made sure we read the text and unpacked what would be challenging for students in a complex text. Our goal this year has been for students to read, write, and speak about complex text. All grade level teams engaged in this work over the summer, even among a pandemic. So I want to give all my teams a huge shout out of the process of looking into the complex texts. They work to identify text-dependent questions as scaffolds to support students in referring explicitly back to a complex text. Also, we continue to learn about the components of the Common Core ELA block and the importance of a foundational skills block, specifically at the kindergarten and second grade level due to children's brain development. Well, we know we also need to reinforce these foundational skills for students who still need to develop them at upper grades. Letters came to my attention through one of my kindergarten teachers. This desire to further learn about the skills within the reading block has led us to where we are now in the process of letters learning for teachers in kindergarten through second grade, including our instructional coach, interventionist, a bilingual resource teacher, a cross-categorical, and myself. As I've heard you all say, it's essential that we take anti-racist actions to supporting students in our focus groups. And this is one step that we can take around changing how we've taught literacy by immediately knowing where our students are at in their literacy trajectory and then being able to teach them immediately. Sarah?
And I am Sarah Larson. I am the principal at Alvium Elementary School. And I also want to thank you for this opportunity to share with you about our work at Alvium. Our school has been doing much of the same work that Jackie just shared about. And so I want to share a little bit about the collective efficacy and action that is taking place at Alvium. The interest in the science of reading and the reading curriculum process started with one of my first grade teachers who volunteered to go from third grade to first grade this past year. And she was really motivated and inspired to learn more about the actual act of teaching reading. She shared what she was learning with her teammates, and together they came to me with some different opportunities that they wanted to pursue over the course of the year. So they offered a voluntary book study of The Knowledge Gap by Natalie Wexler, which helped a group of our staff learn the importance of a content-based literacy curriculum, in which we start building content knowledge, academic vocabulary, and background knowledge on a variety of topics as early as kindergarten and first grade. They then came to me asking about letters PD, kind of like Jackie was sharing with her teacher, as they learned more about the science of reading. And we currently have a very similar cohort to Jackie with our K2 teachers, our interventionist, my instructional coach, bilingual resource teacher, a cross-categorical teacher, and myself, participating in this learning. Jackie also mentioned the Achievement Network, and I think my work with this partnership over this past year, having a coach, both for myself in literacy and leadership, as well as someone to support our data-driven culture, has really helped us to get our systems stronger than what they were. And through that learning, we have explored rigorous, complex texts with our teachers through professional development, and they realized that we needed to make some adjustments in our practices. And they wanted to start hearing more about the curricular resources that I was looking at as part of the adoption committee. And I had some teams approach me and ask if they could try some, just to see what a content-based literacy program would feel like in the classroom. And they immediately were amazed at what the kids could do.
Did everybody just freeze, or? Sarah, I think you just froze, or was that mine?
No, it was just you, Gloria.
Oh, sorry.
Oh.
That's all right.
I missed that. Like everybody just froze for a minute there.
So I was okay? You guys could still hear me?
Yes, you're fine.
Okay. So they started exploring these different curricular materials and realized that we need some support within our classrooms with complex text and explicit foundational skills. So like Jackie's teams, over the summer, we met to further our commitment to literacy as an anti-racist strategy, and as a leadership team and the entire K-5 staff decided to look more into the expeditionary learning curriculum, or EL curriculum. And so this year they are working together with K2 teachers doing the letters PD and K5 teachers trying out some new curricular materials to provide us some feedback. And that's what brings us here to our collaborative partnership with Gompers for the 2020-21 school year. So you can go to the next slide, please. And on this next slide, you'll see the work that we have developed or that we are working through this year together. Strengthening our data-driven culture with our ANET partnership, really looking at the complex texts, reviewing assessment data, having conversations about what does that data tell us and what's our next step in the classroom to make an impact on our students' learning, the letters training, and our text-based literacy approach. And so we're very fortunate on these next few slides to bring our teacher voices into the room, and I'm thankful again for you allowing us to do so. So the next slide, please. This was one from one of my first grade teachers. I'm really enjoying learning the science of reading. I knew there was science behind it, but I didn't know exactly what it was. I know it's early in the process, and I'm excited to start using some of the things that we learn with kids. When I first started in the district 20 years ago, it was all about balanced literacy. At times to me, it seemed like a throw as much at them as we can in as many different ways as possible and hope that it sticks. This, meaning the science of reading, seems like a more precise science that I'm excited to learn how to use with any curriculum. And next slide, please. And then a second grade teacher added in, we're really loving the expeditionary learning skills lessons, especially for second grade. Mondo was okay for first grade, but I imagine the EL skills for first grade and kinder would be better based on my experience with both. We haven't gone far in the letters training, but it really makes sense and is so informative. It is refreshing to understand how kids learn to read, and I believe we will have the skills to teach every child to read when we are done. I am so excited that our district is investing in their teachers, which is a true investment in every child that will come through the district.
And I'm going to lift into the room the voice of two educators at Gompers. Phonics and spelling instruction may not make sense to students unless they are developing a fairly high level of proficiency with phoneme awareness. Knowing this, the best way to help our students is to educate teachers about phoneme awareness and how to teach it with skill, accuracy, and engagement. This is one of the many benefits of the letters training. That was a kindergarten teacher from Gompers and a second grade teacher. I knew reading was hard, but I didn't know that it requires several major regions of the left side of the brain to perform. In addition, I learned that we cannot understand by reading what we cannot understand by listening. Listening and oral language are major sub-skills needed to become a proficient reader. Thank you.
All right. I just want to thank Jackie and Sarah for their contributions and their partnership in this presentation tonight. As I was thinking about this and listening to these two leaders, I thought about the power in, right, those two schools working together as they learned and as they tried something new, you know, as they encountered successes and challenges. It's been important that they have each other to work through on this. And I'm just thinking to myself about how that pairing is something that might be really important to think about as we continue to move through the process. So thank you, Sarah and Jackie, again, just appreciate you and continue to learn from you. Okay, just a few next steps. One that's most important, though, that I want to talk about before we end the presentation. Next slide, please. So our immediate next step that we want to talk about and that we want to start getting calendared is our task force. The charge of the task force is to lift the voices of our staff, community members, families, local experts, right? Dr. Jenkins had some right here in our backyard, and our children, our students. We want to hear diversity of thought. We want to hear what people bring to the table, from what research base they're speaking, and to really think about and learn from multiple people coming to the table. This task force will also do some learning about the science of reading. We have just started that learning here tonight. Share perspectives, as I said, that are based on research and results, and help us with examining materials and resources, seeing what children will put their hands on, helping us to figure out timelines, right? A timeline fits within the overall work of the district, and we want to be sure that we have capacity and that we are doing our very best as we move forward. It's hard to balance the urgency of this, right, with also doing it really well. And we know that that is just a natural tension that we have in any system. So we want to keep talking about that and help people to understand why we're making the collective decisions that we're making moving forward. Next slide. So this is a draft of what we think will be a budget. It's in year one, and this was also something that we discussed in a passing referendum, passing budget. And as we said before, this commitment to early literacy will require significant investment, right, of time. This is the right work over time, and an investment beyond what local funding can sustain for just 1 year. So these are the kinds of areas where we'll be investing in: materials, including materials with explicit structured phonics, professional learning, and then those pieces we talked about that are in the wider approach, right? Strengthening that transition from 4K to 5K, something around increasing reading certification for our teachers. And then also we had talked about a full day 4K pilot moving forward, right? All of these pieces fit together in an early literacy strategy. Next slide, please. Okay, so that is it. For us, we have talked a lot. Thank you for participating in this with us. And I say with us, knowing that we are together. I want to thank the team. Some folks on this budget presentation or the board presentation, it's their first time presenting to the board. I want to say thank you to the team for doing that. I want to say and acknowledge that we have 3 bilingual staff members on this team moving forward. So we have all kinds of diversity of thought and knowledge of how children learn to read from multilingual backgrounds as well. And we appreciate all of those perspectives brought to the table. So looking forward to more to come. And I will turn it over to Dr. Jenkins here as we round out our presentation on early literacy.
Hey, I just want to say thank you to everyone who presented tonight. You guys were fabulous, you really were. And I think the new additions to our team is just strengthening us. And we do take seriously the questions that you asked tonight. I think you're going to make us better even with the questions you asked. Tough questions tonight. You guys must have stayed up all last night thinking of this presentation. But I tell you, Gloria, the work that we're going to have to do with children beyond just the early, our early learners, we know that's serious work and that's historical, but it doesn't mean that we can't start looking at that. And we are, and you saw in the presentation, Lisa, thanks for laying it out. And I have to say kudos to Lisa, the way she's taken this bull by the horn and she's running with it, and the team that's supporting. Thank you, Kaylee, for your work and those principals and your staff voices. Thank you to all. Thanks, Ananda, for giving us so much time. This is the main thing, learning. This is what we should be about in the instructional work group. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jenkins, and thank you, Lisa, for modeling such beautiful gratitude to our staff and particular our new staff that came in and spoke so beautifully about telling our story. I think Lisa and I have been working over the summer on like what is this instruction group could look like from not just a content holder but this place where we learn together as board members, but also get really meaningful and intentional feedback to our staff in order for them to continue to do the work. But that those spaces are also spaces where there's a lot of exchange and a lot of growth happening for all of us. So thank you, Lisa, for emulating that extremely well. I also wanted to give thanks to our building staff. We don't get to hear from our building staff as often, I think, as we would like. And that's another change that Lisa and I have been talking about to both highlight the work that our buildings are doing. I know that people are going to be saying, well, go Gompers and Albion presented to the board. When are we next? I am pretty sure that that's going to happen. And that's really exciting because I think that's going to make folks in the building get excited to come and highlight some of their work. And I really appreciate Jackie and Sarah really telling the story and also sharing about some of your building staff as well. With all of that gratitude, I want to pass on to my colleagues. And I think I'm just going to do a round robin because it feels a little bit more efficient. And Karuzi, I'll start with you and then Gomez-Schmidt.
Thanks, Ananda. So thank you for all of this. It was great to hear from all the new staff. Thank you for being here and for presenting. And also, I'm really, really grateful to Jackie and Sarah for bringing in the on-the-ground perspective of what's going on in our schools and the voices of our staff. That's so important as we move forward with this. I also really love that you quoted Timothy Shanahan in this presentation. He's one of my go-to people to read his blog when I'm thinking about where we're headed with literacy in this district. And he has a really good quote about the simple view of reading, which I found and I'm going to read. And that is that the simple view of reading has been very useful. But if you take it too literally, you'll stray from evidence-based reading instruction real fast. I think we need to be cautious when we talk about the simple view of reading and acknowledge that what we're doing right now is anything but simple. If it was simple, we would have solved the achievement gap many, many, many years ago. I think we need to make sure that when we talk about the science of reading, we're not just using it as a catch-all phrase, but we're actually starting to get specific about what that means. What are the different evidence-based strategies we're going to use to meet the needs of children who were failing at this point. I think it's really easy to throw around terms like science of reading as if they are, in a glib way, like a glib solution. And I know that's not our goal here. I think we just need to be cautious to make sure that we're always focused on evidence-based practice and, specifically what that means for different kids with different needs. Shanahan also talks about grade level texts in his work. I think his basic stand is that grade level texts are very useful when children are learning decoding skills. And once they get those skills under their belt, which is, I think, an average of the beginning of second grade, it actually makes more sense to give children challenging texts than grade level texts. And he does distinguish between those two. Challenging texts give kids more of a reason to try out the strategies that they're learning. Grade level texts may not inspire them to use those strategies because they don't need them, because the grade level texts they're able to use. They're at their grade level. I think as we move forward, we have to be really mindful of what makes kids want to read. Kids may read because they want to learn. They may read because they want to understand their identity and their history, or understand the identity and history of others. They may want to exercise their imaginations or expand their ideas about the possibilities that they have in this world. I hope that as we move forward with this, we won't just focus on making sure all children have access to grade level curriculum, but make sure all children are inspired to read and find the joy in reading. And I'm super excited that we're working with Dr. Ludson Billings, because I think she will help make that happen for many of our children for whom that is not happening right now. They're not seeing their identity and their culture and their history reflected in the materials that we're giving them. I also want to just kind of hone in on the next steps. I appreciate all the information that you've given us with your ideas about implementation timeline and budget. I think we need to really focus in on what we as a board are going to need to decide moving forward as we do this important work and support, work together to support each other in this important work. And I think that boils down to some budget decisions that we will need to make, and also some accountability decisions and accountability metrics that we will need to share. In terms of the budget, I think that comes down to curriculum, professional development, and engagement. And as we're able to get more detailed information about that, I think that would be really helpful. For the accountability piece, I think it's really important to take the information that we got tonight, and as we move forward, hone that into a plan with strategic goals and metrics to measure those strategic goals, so that we can, like, as I said, hold each other mutually accountable to making sure that we're making the progress that we want to see, not just in terms of number of people trained and number of curricula deployed in number of schools, but the actual impacts we're having on children. And I know we won't know that right away, but we need to be thinking long term. I also think it would be really helpful to, I don't know what kind of evaluation y'all are doing of the pilot at LVM and Gompers, but to get more in-depth results of, I know it's a one-year pilot and there's only so much we can learn from it, but knowing as much as we can, I think will help us with those budget decisions and also with strategic goals and metrics as we move forward. Thank you again for all of this. I'm really excited about this work.
Thanks, Chris. Schmidt?
Yeah, thank you. And I'll just echo the sentiments and the thanks for all of this work in this presentation tonight. A special thanks to Sarah and Jackie for elevating the work that is happening at Gompers and LVM. And I have to tell you, I'm very excited to hear that it's whole instructional staffs in schools that are being trained. So it's the instructional coaches, it's the teachers, it's the specialists in the school. And the only thing I want to highlight, and this is not a criticism, but I think for a long time, the advanced learning department has been working in isolation. And so I would just like to say, let's make sure that we aren't putting a grade level ceiling on this new effort in literacy, and that we're really working to make sure that when students are ready to move, they can move and they can keep learning and growing as they go. And however that looks for integrating that department to support that work, I would love to see that happen and be part of the conversation going forward, because we really are going to find students from all demographics who are advanced learners once we start adding this comprehensively into the work we're doing in every area. So thanks. Keely looked like she had a comment there. She had jumped on.
I just want to echo what you're saying, Chris. I absolutely agree with that. I think that's absolutely right. I just wanted to hop on and just let you know I am hearing you. I'm hearing the need to just continue to work with AL. I will say that Sharon is doing an incredible job leading that team and is fully immersed in these conversations along with our other directors and everyone else who is in this work. So yes, absolutely taking an approach with AL that is fully integrated and not seen as an add-on, but someone who is at the table and in these conversations at the complete course. Absolutely.
That's great. And just to highlight what Ali had said before about the gender gap in the early elementary years for girls in math, I think we see the flip side of that for boys in literacy. And so really, taking a look at that too as we're doing this work.
Thank you, Chris. Savian and Ali.
I'm going to.
Okay. Ali. I think Savian froze. Okay. I think Savian said that he was going to pass.
Okay. Savian, definitely let us know if you want to chime in. I'm sorry, I don't know exactly what happened. I really appreciate the second half of that presentation and getting to hone in on what's going on within schools specifically. So thank you all for flushing out kind of the on the ground work of early childhood literacy. In alignment with some of what Chris Gomez-Schmidt was saying, I think, as expansive a perspective we can have is helpful. And I think, looking to the arts and things specifically like the performing arts and our students' ability to engage with music and all of these other things that are known to enhance reading, right? If kids have more creative outlets in school, their behavior and overall performance is impacted. But also, when we talk about the arts, when we talk about literacy, we shouldn't treat those areas as mutually exclusive. A lot of us learned the alphabet by singing about it. So I really appreciate the broadness of this conversation, the inclusiveness of this conversation. And I can't thank my board colleagues enough, particularly Chris Carusi for her question about the bias within testing, for challenging us to really think about these dynamics of race in ways that are critical and make us accountable to our children in ways we haven't been historically. So thank you all so much for your contributions tonight.
Thank you, Ellie. Looks like we are experiencing still some really challenging technology here. Gloria and Nikki, and then I'll move it to you, Savian.
Ananda, I'm going to pass. I think everybody's answered the questions that I.
Okay, Nikki. You turn your mic.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. One, I want to thank everyone for the presentation. The 16% and proficiency is a scary statistic, especially because I don't think it shows the true number of individuals who are Black and brown with disabilities who are often not included. It also probably doesn't include Native American individuals who probably are too small a population to even be on the list. I really appreciate what the department, what you guys are doing. You're working incredibly hard on it, and I'm enjoying the science of reading. Here's the one thing I would change would be to please include someone on the planning or decision-making committee who's either has dyslexia or some type of disability to increase that perspective, because oftentimes that perspective is overlooked. And there are 35 million people in this country with disabilities, but oftentimes we, especially people of color with disabilities, are the last ones included. And that's not acceptable. And it will never be acceptable. The other thing I want to say is thank you, Chris Gomez-Schmidt, for bringing up the floors and ceilings on advanced learning. I remember being in second grade, reading at an 11th grade level, who couldn't write my name, getting a D in reading because I couldn't write. And I was told I wasn't supposed to read books like that, so I couldn't go to the library in school because I read books I wasn't supposed to read. I, to this day, dislike libraries with a sign that says kids department. No, child should read wherever they feel comfortable reading, at whatever level. I don't care if that's comics. I don't care if that's newspapers. I don't care if that's War and Peace. Let them explore, but that always bothered me, so I really appreciate it. Most importantly, thank you for including our staff. When I first started on the board, and no offense to any staff, we had a lot of canned focus groups. And they were good. They just kept saying the same things. And now I'm actually hearing from teachers. I'm hearing from principals. I'm hearing from people who are actually being affected by decisions. And that to me is incredibly important. So I appreciate it. And Lisa, I'd love to meet with you further on this issue because regarding task force and several other things, because I think there's some things we could discuss. And I think you're doing a wonderful job and we need to focus on this. Phonics, the science of reading is clear that what we did before isn't working and what we're doing now is necessary if we're going to ever get rid of the achievement gap. But not just that, to ever give our children a chance to succeed, not just academically, but in life. So I really appreciate it. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Nikki, for such inspirational words. Savian?
Thank you for the whole team, for the whole presentation. I can see how hard and passionate you've worked on this. So turn my video off. Yeah, I can see how hard and passionate y'all have poured into this work, and we'll be definitely looking forward to seeing, the hopefully improved results on engagement as well as reading, as we try to bring in more culturally relevant lessons for our students to improve that engagement for students, and seeing how this aligns with our 4K strategy as well. Our entire early learning strategy, I think, will be really transformative for the district from the bottom up, and bringing in principals and teacher input makes it the movement really grassroots and can help us achieve that culture change that we're looking for. So thank you, and looking forward to continuing the work.
Thank you so much, Savian. Lisa, anything else to wrap us this part of our evening before we move to the next item?
No, I think that about covers it for our evening tonight. Again, just really want to thank you all for your partnership in this. It's really exciting, and looking forward to continuing this discussion often and learning together.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Thank you, everyone, for that presented. We are moving to the next item, but before we do that, because we've been sitting for 2 hours, and I know every time I try to get us at a break, I'm gonna insist that we take at the very least 2 minutes break, and we get 10. Did you say 10? Until 7:10. If you don't want to take a break, that's fine. But I would recommend people just stand up, stretch, go grab some glass of water, and then we'll come back at 7:10.
Thank you all.
Bye, Jackie. Good to see you.
Thank you.
My thumb hurts really bad.
All right, everyone. Let's come back. Thank you, Barb, for transitioning us. Okay. Savian.
You said 10 minutes, right?
Yeah.
Was it 10 minutes?
10 minutes? No, 2 minutes.
Oh, 2 minutes. Okay, I thought you said 10 minutes.
I tried to get 10 minutes. Nobody ever wants to do 10 minutes. And then we speak for about an hour.
Yeah, and then, yeah.
So I'm like, can we just take just a short break so people can stretch out like a little bit, you all?
I think, oh no, it looks like most people are back. Okay.
Yeah. Savian? Yeah, okay,
Bonjour.
great. Thank you, Savian. So for our next item, it was something that came from our last board meeting. And I'm just excited. I think there was an opportunity there. We heard loud and clear from many of our teachers and school staff around educator effectiveness, and it was really interesting because I shared with my colleagues that the DPI had released a version of educator effectiveness during COVID, which mostly highlight coaching and support and all the things that we need to be provided for our teachers and our educators. And I understand that there was a lot of support in making sure that we bring this conversation to this group. So I want to honor that, and I'll pass to Dr. Jenkins to cover a little bit more on this item and the intent on your memo or anything else that we're discussing today.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for bringing this out here at this particular meeting. I just want to say it was a lot of conversations at all levels, from the teachers, the administrators, the MTI, the principal group. We all came together and really collaborated. We had started the conversation actually before that particular board meeting, and it kind of culminated in us having a joint release in terms of the collaboration that we were doing, and right in alignment with some of the things that DPI was saying too, in terms of what we should do during this particular time, the guidance that they laid out. And you heard all of that, what's going on right now in the previous presentation, and our teachers and principals and all of us just trying to work together to get the maximum outcome for our students. This is not about at all, and you can kind of see it in our memo where we're saying it's not about lowering any expectations. It's about taking care of the well-being of our students, of our adults as well, and continue to have high quality learning. But we could do it differently. We didn't have to do all of the things that were there in the evaluation tool initiative. So I'm very pleased with the outcome. And so I have my other colleagues speak to that now at this point, but that's basically the wind up in a very good place that I think we all pretty proud of where we are right now.
Thank you, Dr. Jenkins. Is somebody else is gonna come and speak, or?
I think we have Jorge here tonight. He was going to speak to that particular piece.
Jorge? All right. Hello, Jorge.
There you go.
Good evening, everyone. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Jenkins. And yes, so so in taking and looking through the release from Katie Rainey and the DPI team on the flexibility around educator effectiveness, we really took all the considerations and the flexibility from the document that was released. I think what was really helpful was meeting and collaborating with MTI as well as our principals and hearing from staff as well as our supports through our EE strategists, and just thinking about what would be the best way to lean into the flexibility and also be able to support through this time. So I think what you see in the memo is really capturing, just really what staff asked for in the regards of like the flexibility, but also really leaning into, as Dr. Jenkins said, still having high expectations, still thinking about, our impact on students, and really thinking about how we can lean on our educator effectiveness strategists for support, and also have a little bit of efficacy, where you can see in the memo, staff are able to engage in choosing to opt into a supporting year this year if they are in a summer year. So if there's, not sure if Lisa, you wanted to add anything, but I know much of that language is in the memo. And I think one thing that I will say before Lisa shares is that, when you think about the language within the DPI flexibility and the document for EE, it really talks about how the 8 components that were looked at, that they were really important in thinking about engaging students and their well-being, and also racial equity and social justice. So I just think it's important that we call that out, but it was all, again, just really happy that where the process got us. So Lisa, is there anything you wish to add, Dr. Jenkins?
Lisa, go ahead first, and then I'll close it with that.
No, I guess I would reinforce, Jorge, that the process was really important. Talking with the principals, talking with MTI, having a real honest conversation about what is best for our students and staff, and really paying attention right to this adaptive work that this is, as we all learn and grow in this pandemic, and as we have all made promises, right, to our children and families that we want to be sure that we do our best at working towards as well. So again, just want to thank you all for your patience with us, as we learn through the process, and I'm looking forward to partnering with MTI as we move through this.
Yeah, and I'll just close by saying it really was a great process, and the intellectual exchange, it was beautiful. And I wanted to also clear up, there was some communication that came out in the State Journal in terms of perspective that maybe Mr. Jorge had and that I had with the initial memo, where we were going before we got to the point of waiving. But we're all on the same page. And I tell you, this process, the intellectual exchange, I don't think that we should and could agree on every single thing that we do. We should push one another. And I think the work of Dr. Hicks, bringing her voice to the table, Dr. Ebby, MTI, and I just think we came out with the best possible product, being the fact that we collaborated the way that we did. And that's what I'm looking forward to us doing in this district as we move forward. And any and everybody in our district, if you have a voice, you can lift a voice, and then through the process, we'll come out with a final product. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jenkins. And I feel like I'll speak for myself, but I'm sure some of my colleagues have this similar sentiment around the collaborative nature. And even with this last 3 months that we've been seeing your leadership, and 4 months that we've been seeing your leadership and seeing how you are managing the district, like that is for me one of the highlights of how that's being translated, this collaborative nature. I certainly really appreciate MTI putting their name on this memo, and then also having 2 very esteemed principals in that memo as well. So thank you so much. So open to the floor. Nikki, I see your hand.
I got a lot of emails of teachers being told that their evaluations were still mandatory. I've gotten 2 emails saying that educator effectiveness is still required for first-year teachers. Is there a way we could just clarify that these are guides and not requirements?
So I can speak to that, Nikki. So the process, right? So we're talking, there's a couple of different pieces to educator effectiveness when we think about it as a process, and then the evaluation as sort of the culminating summative part of the entire process. So what we're saying is that we are not requiring teachers in the sense of they get to opt into a summary year, which at the end culminates in an evaluation. What we're saying is that they can opt into a supporting year where that wouldn't be the case. The process as it's laid out in the memo and the way we've been discussing it and the way we've shared it across all the different groups and the way we've collaborated is that the professional practice goal would be something that teachers will be engaging with, as that is supportive of their professional growth. Also during this time that's super critical and important, and is really lifted up in that the guidelines that Katie Rainey and DPI put out in regards to the flexibility around the EE process. The other part is that we also took, and this was part of the collaboration and the conversation that we had with principals, but also with Andy and his team at MTI, where we looked at the student learning objective. So in looking at the forms themselves, we took out the bulk of it in the sense of that we basically said, we're right. All this is a lot of compliance-based work, and we really want to focus, as we said, on the professional practice, on that adaptive work. And so we left just the SLO statement. So really, it's focused around the professional practice goal, having a student learning objective that is tied to the plans that schools are making around their school improvement plans and their support to students, based on the very discussion we just had earlier. And so, yeah, so there are some options in this, but in terms of the professional practice goal and the SLO statement, those would still be completed.
And Nikki, also,
yeah.
if I may add really quick, have whoever it is go see whichever level. If it's principals, go see Dr. Hicks and Dr. Ebby. If it's teachers, go to MTI. We did this jointly. That was the purpose of us sending out a joint communication. If it's a misunderstanding, just go to one of them. And I tell you, Andy and Ed, and along with the principals, have been fabulous as we work through this together. And it still may be a misunderstanding. It's just a matter when people read things, they interpret it one way.
That's what I'm thinking is what happened is when you read it, people may misinterpret. I know I do it quite a bit.
Yeah, and that's perfectly fine, but just come to us versus talking about it out in the ether somewhere. Just come straight to us. And we have the Wednesday meetings that we've had. Come to us and let's just iron it out and keep it moving.
No, I didn't see the State Journal article, so.
Yeah.
I didn't know they did, but.
Thank you, Nikki.
Or is that the one? No, I knew the one at the end, but I didn't. Did they do two or only one? Anyway, not relevant.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nikki. Anybody else? Any comments? Oh yeah, Chris Caruzzi.
So thank you for putting this on the agenda and for clarifying the flexibilities that we're offering our staff this year, given the pandemic. I would love to put out there that I think this is an opportunity for us to evaluate educator effectiveness. I know that we're legally required to do it. In 2011, the Wisconsin legislature passed, a bill that put this in state statute. We have to do educator effectiveness, and the state has adopted the Danielson framework as the framework for doing that. However, in 2016, Charlotte Danielson herself wrote an article about rethinking teacher evaluation, where she questioned some of the aspects of her own framework and how effective they are. And I think this is an opportunity for us to, while we have to follow the law, we can't break the law, to also talk about, how we can make educator effectiveness better. I know one of the concerns that Danielson raised about her own framework was that building administrators don't always understand the nuances and the art of teaching, because a lot of them actually haven't taught, or they haven't taught the grade level that they're supervising. Or I think that happens in MMSD. I hear that from teachers all the time, that they're being evaluated by an assistant principal who has never taught, or who maybe taught for 1 year and they've taught for 22 years. And as Charlotte Danielson said in her own critique of her framework, that it feels like somebody who has less experience than you is coming in and reducing your very nuanced and difficult job to a checklist and checking off the things that you need or don't need. I would love to see MMSD maybe take advantage of the fact that we're in a pandemic, we're having to rethink things anyway, and think about how we can uniquely meet the requirements of educator effectiveness in a way that doesn't look at teachers through a deficit lens. Danielson pointed out that only 6% or fewer of teachers are actually like not meeting standards. Most teachers are, we need to look at them from a lens of exceptionalists. We're taking good teachers and helping them do better. Can we look at how we can do that better? And can we also look at there have also been some teachers who've said that they haven't actually been evaluated every time they're supposed to be, that their principal or administrator never got around to doing it. And if we're moving towards educator effectiveness being a more high stakes decision point in decisions about tenure and surplus and layoff, we need to make sure everybody's getting an evaluation. So just want to put out there, this might actually be an opportunity to figure out how we do educator effectiveness better in MMSD.
Yeah, Chris, and I would just say and reiterate what Dr. Jenkins has said. If there is, and this is something that's come up, you're right, in regards to folks feeling or saying that they have not been, they haven't had an evaluation or haven't had observations and feedback. I think to Dr. Jenkins' point, it's a perfect opportunity to reach out. We can certainly make sure and check that. That's not an issue on our end of the work. The other part I wanted to say was, yeah, I know that you bring up Charlotte Danielson, and she also says too that when you're thinking about teaching is so complex, and to be distinguished in the work is really, most teachers are proficient in their craft. It's moving into that distinguished realm. And I think that to your point, I know that she's also been talking about the cultural responsive teaching aspect of it. So I know that these are ongoing conversations, and just so that everybody's clear on this, in MMSD since day one, we've committed to this work of helping teachers grow in their craft, knowing that it's so complex, and working with principals and ensuring that they're following the practices and learning and leaning on it. So we have our 2 educator effectiveness strategists that not only support principals, but also support teachers in completing the work, working through the observations. And we're also part of the team that meets with Katie Rainey at DPI. So I think that there's definitely an opportunity to continue to push in on what that looks like, especially as we think about a growth model, right? Asset-based growth model, because that is what Charlotte's framework is. It's a growth model. So yeah, I think those are definitely great, valid points. And I definitely think we can continue to look at that.
I really appreciate those comments. And state statute also says that educator evaluation, not educator effectiveness specifically, but evaluating educators is a board role. It explicitly gives boards responsibility for doing that. And so I'm wondering if we should actually think about an ad hoc committee on this topic. I would just want to put that out there as something where, we could pull together board members and teachers and administrators for some really good conversations about how we can grow as a district in terms of how we, like, as you said, Jorge, get educators to go from great to distinguished. So just want to put that out there.
Yeah,
thanks.
No, thank you, Chris. I think Lisa and I have been talking about it. I think that I really appreciate the way you connected, because you're also speaking about educator effectiveness in the context also of virtual learning, which we're still in it, and it looks like we're going to be in it for a minute longer. So I think that, like, thinking about how sustaining educator effectiveness, what are some of the opportunities to transform educator effectiveness? I do know that DPI has done significant work around that. So, it may be a matter of like, and I also know that in 2016, EE got a really bad rap. So, maybe it's coming back, and to see, like, okay, what is the work now? And maybe that is part of our virtual updates that we do every instruction work group around what does it look like for this transformative EE? But I heard your question. I heard how you said it. So, and I really appreciate that. Ali?
Yeah, Chris, I greatly appreciate you speaking to kind of the broader criticism around educator effectiveness. And I think talking about, how folks are evaluated, the fairness of an evaluation, and who's being brought to the table to have this conversation is really important. I do want to highlight the inclusion of Angie Hicks in this conversation. Angie Hicks is definitely somebody who was a teacher in our district. She was also a janitor in our district, but she was my brother's third grade teacher, and so I don't want to generalize our administrators as people who haven't spent time in the classroom or don't know our community or don't love this district. I think the selection of her in particular, and I know her personally, I don't know the background of every principal we have, but I think that shows that we're including, the voices of women of color. We're including folks who have experienced our district from multiple lenses, right? As teachers, as custodial staff, as administrators, and also people who have sent their babies to this district. So I think we can always benefit from a broader perspective and a critical analysis. But I do greatly appreciate the team that came together to have this conversation, including MTI and the members of our faculty. And Jorge, thank you so much for your remarks this evening.
Thank you, Ali. Well said. Gama Schmidt?
I just wanted to make a quick comment. I've been doing some reading with Charlotte Danielson too, to learn more about educator effectiveness. And I think one of the things that she said is, if, using this for evaluation, if you're going to use a framework, I want you to use my framework, because I think it is the strongest. And so it makes it sound like, she is doing work to evolve about how this might be used, or that's part of the conversation going forward. I guess another thing that I'm curious, because we are in this such different year with virtual instruction, is there a way we're incorporating that into how educators are reflecting so that we can really learn from what they're learning along the way? And I don't know if that's appropriate for, I'm just thinking about the professional practice goals and how that would be different in this virtual, teaching environment, just to make sure we're capturing that to learn from how this is working this year.
Jorge, do you have any comment?
Yeah, no, I think and you made an excellent connection. I mean, when I'm speaking to staff and I'm speaking to principals, a lot of it is through the professional practice goal. And there's opportunities throughout the year to really reflect on that professional practice goal. So when they're meeting at the or when they're going through, if they're not meeting with their principal, they're going through the process and engaging with perhaps a teacher team or another colleague or a coach perhaps. And they have time to think about what does that actually mean for them. And as they go through the process itself, it's laid out so that you can be reflective, so then at mid-year, you'll have a reflection. And at the end of the year, you'll have another reflection. And I think that just reflecting in general that's also in itself a practice, right? Being a reflective practitioner, it's not something that you just do, it's a practice. And so this is also something that this is part of the culture that we're creating here in MMSD in creating reflective practitioners. And that's a part of the process that we embrace. And you brought it up. Yeah, perfect example is through the professional practice goal. So yes, and there's always that growth around reflection. So thank you.
I would just like to lift something in this, in particular with both Chris's questions and comments around Danielson, someone who's been trained in Danielson and trained others in it. It's a guide. And Danielson is no different than any other former practitioner, now become someone and produced a model like Lucy Calkins. For years, I was balanced literacy. Hey, I'm telling you. But as we learn, we do better. And during this pandemic, not only are teachers asked to learn, administrators, and if you remember when I said EE, I woke up one morning at 3:30, I'm saying, shucks, if I was a principal evaluating a teacher right now, how do I account for all these other things? So as I'm telling you, I'm a first-year educator now. After 30 years, I'm back to being a first year because I've never experienced this pandemic. You guys are back to being first-year board members. And at the end of the day, we all want to put out some accountability for ourselves. The one thing that I do reject a little bit, and I love Danielson, but I reject the fact that 95% of teachers across the country are too proficient. I think there is something in the evaluation system, which you brought up, Chris. I think we do need to look at it, because if we had truly 95% being proficient, where's the direct correlation between how our children are performing and proficient? You know, and so we as educators have to continue, and we just can't let numbers, like I don't think we should just let the evaluation be the only thing that we do, but we should hold ourselves accountable for children learning. But you don't use any evaluation tool as a gotcha moment. It should be professional development for the teacher and the administrator who are involved in the process, so that we can inform what we do to improve outcome for students.
Thank you, Dr. Jenkins.
Thank
When
you.
you said like go for board members to go first year, I got a little dizzy. For some of us, it's been a hell of a year. So, we need to move forward, not go back. But I appreciate your comments, and I appreciate like also like always your sharpness around really thinking critical. There's also an array of other things that we haven't talked about that EE does in regards to the racialization of our teachers and the way that they experience the district, the interactions between racialized experiences of our teachers with different principals, you know, principals of color and white principals when there's a teacher, when it's a white teacher and a teacher of color. There's so much other really interesting data that illuminates the climate of our schools in a way that I think it's really positive, and we are still, yeah, this conversation is too kind of narrow. So I do want for us to kind of experience educator effectiveness in a much more expensive way. So I don't see anyone else. Oh, Gloria, do you want to like final comment and we move to the next item?
Yeah, I mean, I think, so just on educator effectiveness, I think, you know, when I'm in these conversations, I always center myself on those who we are serving, right? You know, Dr. Jenkins, you're gonna laugh at me again, but it is really centering on, I always think of, when I think about educator effectiveness, I think about those students and families that we fail every year, and how we are evaluating our teachers upon that, right? And I'm not saying it is solely on our teachers, but it is this cultural component that I think is missing. And when I think about educator effectiveness, I do think about that. That is where my mind goes, right? Because they are part of the puzzle to the success of our students in learning. And I'm very narrowly focused. I think for the broader student body, I think it works. But what about the focused on our students of color who are failing every year? Like, you know, I mean, how do we measure that? And do we measure that? Like, I don't know if this is just a bizarre question and I'm just like totally out of.
No, it's part of the conversation. I don't know.
It's an excellent question.
Jorge, did you have?
Yeah, no, I mean, so your question being, do we measure that? Yeah, I mean, I think that we have metrics to think about, like how our students who are our students of color, our students who are English language learners, our students who have IEPs and special needs. Like we look at all of that. We do when we're thinking about this. And I think what we've also done is that as we're thinking about this purpose and this process of growth and educator effectiveness in the process, we also have all of our supervisors trained and support them when they go out into all of our alternatives as well. So in thinking about We know we've done sessions and observations in SAPAR. We've done observations in all the alternative sites. We've gone out there with administrators and worked with teachers in those sites. So I mean, it's definitely not, I'm not saying, listen, we've talked about this, and we talked about it just in the last presentation when we look at the disparities in our data specific to our students of color and our students, language learners, and our students with special needs. And we can go across the board there. I'm just saying that these are definitely conversations, and this process allows us to begin and have those conversations. And I think that that is something that is a big part of this. This is what Dr. Jenkins was just saying in regards to when we look at our data across the board, because we're looking at students and student success and thinking about our students. And we're looking at where are our students and their growth and their achievement based on how our teachers are performing in terms of their instructional practices, and how our principals are providing feedback, and how are they doing that with all calibrated and all. And so it goes throughout the entire organization. And I think it just allows us to begin having this conversation around why it's so important to have feedback, why it's so important to lean into growth, why it's so important that we start to have these discussions where we maybe perhaps haven't leaned into them enough. So, I mean, there's lots more to say there, but I'll stop. Hopefully some of that resonated and answered some of your question. And I don't know if Dr. Jenkins would like to add anything.
Yeah, I would, in terms of, first of all, a lot of it, we have an imperfect evaluation system. It is, point blank. I have seen no evidence of a perfect one. And we have to do a mind shift of what's the purpose. And everyone think it's just feedback. We have to, just like we talk about the science of reading, we have to talk about the science of questioning, the appropriate questions to get individuals to reflect on their practice. And the fear when you say evaluations, that individuals, this is a tool to use to get rid of me. We've got to somehow start having these conversations, just like we came together on EE. It needs to be a larger discussion, going back to Chris Cruz's question in the beginning. We need to have a larger conversation now, and even helping DPI. Is this the right way to go about improving learning? And we've been doing it. We have the worst outcomes in the nation. This is an opportunity for us to just change that trajectory by just coming together and say, what do we really want to do for our children, and bring the voices of everyone to the table and move forward. And I'll stop right there. But this is a larger discussion we need to have, though.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Jenkins and Jorge, for that. I mean, I think, we oftentimes look at the deficiency of the student, right? And when we talk about, education, and I like the conversation we're having around educator effectiveness. I think I really like that we're having this discussion. There was another question I had, but I lost it. I think, yeah, I'll come back if it comes to me, I'll come back. But I think my point in that is part of the evaluation, right? It is really a focus, has a focus on hearing from Dr. Jenkins, those parents that we met with last weekend, right? Or a couple weekends ago. Our most vulnerable students is part of the evaluation of educator effectiveness, right? Like in a very culturally relevant and responsive way, right? Is having that focus, right? If we are going to be about Black excellence, and that measurement has to be in there, it's some component of it. So okay, that's what I have.
Thanks, Gloria. Nikki and Chris Caruzzi, and then we'll move into the next item.
Gloria brings up an excellent point, but I come from a district in which a few Black and brown students were put in special ed and sent to the school for the severely disabled, which was also by placement, because no one would teach them because it affected their teaching scores. They fought over who got stuck with them. they fought over who got stuck with me. I don't want to recreate a system that does that because no one should. And that's what I'm afraid if we do it the wrong way is going to happen. Lakeland is one of the oldest institutions of the state of Wisconsin that's a segregated learning environment solely for the disabled. And it's primarily Black, brown, and severely disabled. And it's become a place in which those who people don't want to teach because it might make them look bad, that's where they tend to be placed. And that's what I'm afraid of. That's my fear. Your point is excellent. I'm just worried that it'll be used in a manner that it will make it worse while we're trying to make it better. And I'd love to work with you on trying to make it better. I've seen the other side.
Thanks, Nikki. And then Carusi.
Dr. Jenkins, I really appreciate your comment about the science of questioning. And I also appreciate your consistent focus on the need for coaching in the district. I completely agree with you. And feedback I've gotten from staff is that sometimes the administrative requirements of educator effectiveness get in the way of that coaching that needs to happen for educators to get to the next level and help our kids have better outcomes. So I think, just to clarify, that's kind of where I'm coming from in this conversation about rethinking educator effectiveness, is how do we coach and work with staff in the best way possible so that we get the outcomes that we want. And if we can continue this conversation and continue to focus on that, I think it will help us get to a better place in terms of the work that we're doing if our educators actually showing the outcomes we want to see.
Chris, I'll tell you, Carolyn Downey, the Downey walkthrough method, and you look at that process for asking the right questions to get teachers to reflect. I've actually applied that to administrators, central office people, or just asking questions, the science of asking the questions to get individuals to reflect. And that's what I believe. A lot of the evaluation models, I believe they're antiquated. We might as well go back to Madeline Hunter because, and I'm glad to see that Danielson, which I knew that she has been reflecting, because yes, she went in a different direction, but it's being applied very much similarly to the Madeline Hunter. And we're just in an environment of fear right now. And individuals who are not trained appropriately in Danielson, they don't carry it out. So I understand too, those comments, some of the teachers, the comments she's making, but we have to come together and refine our process though for what we're doing. And I agree with someone said earlier too, I think it may have been Ali said, we don't need to throw everything out, but how do we refine it? Really, so the investment we've made, that's not all wasted, but there needs to be a shift. And every time there's a shift, it doesn't need to be always drastic. But in this particular case, we're getting learning outcomes. We do need to make a very hard shift to get to the outcomes that we need, which Gloria's always talking about. The Black and the brown children, the most marginalized children, going the direction we're going now, it's going to be tough, but we can get there though.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Dr. Jenkins. Anybody else? Any comments? Okay. We should transition to the next item in our agenda, which is also an item of great interest for myself and many of my colleagues. Is regarding sexual harassment policy, and I see Eric already put his screen in there. I'm curious, Lisa, if you have any opening remarks before we move to Eric's presentation.
Sure. Thank you, Ananda. I think that Eric's presentation is going to be really about the new policy that we have as a district around sexual harassment and how federal law has informed that. So I'm going to let him start. He's got a few slides that will guide the conversation. And then if we have questions or other concerns, we can certainly engage him in that. There you are, Eric. You're on the other side of my screen there. Welcome.
Yeah, I don't know how I bounce around in Zoom. So good evening, everybody. I believe everyone knows me, but just in case, my name is Eric Keston. I am the Affirmative Action Officer, Title IX Coordinator, and Contract Compliance Coordinator for the district. And Right before I start, I just want to acknowledge that this is a shift compared to what you have been talking about tonight. And so this is just a difficult topic because we're talking about people, kids, adults, that this only, as I often say, people never call me when they're having a good day. And so that's what we'll be talking about. And so just to frame the conversation around the policy, what I want to start with is just to say that this policy is a standalone policy responsive to the federal law. I presented to you briefly in August talking about how the Office of Civil Rights had introduced new regulations for the first time in like 40 years. And so that's specifically what this policy is about. Also, everyone who was protected last year is still currently protected through the district's current non-discrimination policies. Those are not changing at all. And I can talk briefly if you have questions about how the two would interact. But if a situation might fall under Title IX, then we go through that policy and we have to be compliant with the regulations. And then based on the regulations, I, as the Title IX coordinator or my designee, which I will train and have to make an assessment of a particular situation to see if it falls under the regulations. And again, this is the first time this specific policy is coming before you. So in brief, what happened is, and thank you for moving it forward, Barb, the challenges are, and I mentioned this in August, the regulations are highly prescriptive. The old ones, basically, the previous regulations under Office of Civil Rights basically said you had to have, my position had to exist in a district, and you had to have a policy and procedures. This one is extremely highly prescriptive regarding steps in the process, regarding roles in the process, which is going to influence how much time everything takes, which is the reference to the additional district resources. A part of that. The one basic change that's a challenge is the definition of sexual harassment. They changed that definition. And the way they changed that is, as it says on the screen, is the definition is currently, it used to be severe or pervasive or objectively offensive. And now, under the new Title IX regulations, it's severe and pervasive and objectively offensive. And based on that and that alone, that narrows what falls under the definition of sexual harassment. So one of the challenges that I've had to deal with putting this together, and one of the reasons why there's a standalone policy, is Title IX applies to school districts and colleges and universities, but Title VII for employment also applies, and Title VII has the previous definition of sexual harassment. So we actually have to be able to follow both of them. And so that's why the solution is we have this standalone sexual harassment policy that is specifically responsive to Title IX and Title IX alone. But the old definition that I just mentioned is still captured under the old under the district's non-discrimination policy. So in effect, what happens if something, if an event or situation comes up, and as I said, my designee, which I'd have to train, would make an assessment to see if it might fall under Title IX, under this definition of Title IX. And if it does, it has to go through this process. Now, if it either doesn't, or if we go through this process and it doesn't meet this definition, then they have to go put it through the other process to see if it meets that definition. That's why it's confusing, but that's why everything that was protected before is still protected in the district's non-discrimination policies, and why we're still not touching those other policies. And so if you go to the next slide. This is just, yeah.
Before you move to the next, I just wanted to check, are people doing okay understanding? Eric, it's just because you're breaking up a little bit.
Oh, I'm sorry. Here, you want me? I'll turn my. We'll see. If
really bad sound quality.
I'm so sorry. Is that any better?
We'll see. Why don't you move to the next slide and see? So far, it's doing okay.
I'm sorry. Okay, so this is simply the breakdown of the sections of the policy. So we have the definitions up front. Just so people know what they're reading going forward. I will acknowledge that there are some definitions in there for language we are trying to move away from, such as complainant, respondent, because a complainant is a person who would bring forward a complaint, but that sounds like someone's complaining, which lessens what they're bringing forward. However, these regulations require this terminology. If you read the regulations, they have complainant, they have respondent. In the regulations, they use terms victim, they use the terms of perpetrator. And so the definitions are up front. Then there's just general provisions. And then a basic about the reporting and investigating the complaints. So you can see my role, and then it acknowledges that there'll be violations, discipline, sanctions depending on what's found. And then the notice is just making people aware of the policy. And again, all of this, while the order is not dictated by the new regulations, all of this is compliant with the new regulations. That's pretty much the presentation I have. This is, again, the first time you're seeing the policy, and it'll come back for the regular board meeting.
Thank you so much, Eric. We're gonna just quickly also do a round. Gloria, and then Ali.
I have nothing, another.
Ali?
Yeah, I want to thank you for presenting, Eric. I think the revisions are pretty complex. I think it's really reassuring to know that MMSD has had LGBTQ trans inclusive policy for decades. And so our ability on the local level to make sure our kids have access to, facilities and spaces that affirm their identities is more and more important given these guidelines. And I can't help but say they're disappointing to see renegotiated into this. So I guess any words of encouragement to our students who may be in a position to have to come forward and talk about something awful that's happened in their lives around our ability to support them at this time as Title IX shifts would be incredibly helpful.
So yes, thank you. And I completely agree with you. What I will say briefly is, unfortunately, as we know, the current administration defines gender in a very binary manner. However, it is extremely important to support all of our communities, including the LGBTQ community. And that's, again, one of the reasons why all those protections are still in place in the district's non-discrimination policies. And if a concern comes forward, it won't go through this. It would go through those other policies. So it would be protected. Any situations are protected the same way they have been protected. And it's really important to me, this is personally, these are hard policies. People don't look at these until they have an issue, which just raises anxiety because they're complex and they're difficult and they're in a painful situation. So it's always really important for me to be as transparent as possible, to be as much of a soft landing as possible. So one of the things I have done in the past, and I will do with this policy, is once it's finalized, is put together materials, hopefully there's some videos, things like that, to make it as easy to understand as possible so people know not only what makes sense for this specific policy, but where else to go and when to go there to hopefully support all of our communities.
Thank you so much, Eric.
Thank you, Eric, for doing that work. I greatly appreciate your response and the work that you're doing to make sure folks have the support they need to navigate some pretty complex policy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ali. Chris Caruzzi, and then Chris Gomez-Schmidt.
Thank you for that question, Ali. I think that got at least part of my first question, which is I would actually like to know more about how the new sexual harassment policy and the two non-discrimination policies we have will interact. I appreciate the illustration of gender. Are there other examples you can give in particular of how, I agree that this new definition of sexual harassment is challenging, to say the least. And will our non-discrimination policies help us protect students and staff and anyone else in the district who is encountering sexual harassment and for whom the new definition could be an impediment to addressing the problem?
So it's a hard question. I will do my best to answer it. The challenge is how prescriptive these regulations are. And the reason I say that is the way the regulations read is if a situation, so first of all, this only covers gender and binary gender, the way the federal government currently defines it. So anything else runs through the other policies. So everyone's supported, all the other we're not touching them. All the protected classes are still there. They're still supportive. Everything is still there. And this specific regulation, so Title IX actually covers sex, which means sexual harassment and sexual discrimination. The 2,000 pages of the regulations only cover sexual harassment. They don't even cover sexual discrimination. So we still have to have another policy to still support Title IX. The challenge with this policy is if a concern comes forward that might fall under Title IX, it has to go through this process. And as much as a soft landing as I want, as transparent as I want, as supportive as I as a human being would like to be for other people, the challenge is that what this policy requires is if someone comes forward with a report, I would talk to them to see if they want to file a complaint. If a complaint is filed, we don't get to just talk to the students. We have to pause. A letter has to go to both parties. So a lot of the stated concern that led to these regulations is the lack of due process for people that had to respond to complaints. And so what that means in this process, and I haven't figured out, and I've talked to a number of people in my world who haven't doing Title IX work, who haven't figured out how to work around this, is a letter would have to go out saying exactly what the person is accused of, who is accusing them, when it happened. It's very specific, which putting the definition aside, that alone is extremely scary for anybody. But we have to run it legally under this law, these regulations. If it potentially falls under Title IX, we're required to put it through this first. So
I'm sorry. On my end, he cut out when he said the letter have to go. I know what you're saying because we've already talked about it, but I think that was a critical point. He needs to say that part again so that everybody can hear it.
So I apologize. So what would happen, what used to happen is, okay, I'm not talking about anything criminal at all. Just general things that would come up, inappropriate touching of some way. It would be looked at, it could be handled usually relatively quickly with my support in a school. What has to happen now is there's a pause. If the person who was touched wants to file a complaint, a letter has to go out to the other person saying, this is the person that is accusing you of something. This is exactly what they are accusing you of. You are going to have every right to defend yourself. In addition to that, the regulations say, so we used to tell people not to talk about it for the integrity in the investigation, and for everything else, but these regulations say you can't say that to the parties in these situations because that might hinder their ability to find potential witnesses. So there's all of these things beyond the definition that make this very oppressive and difficult. But how it would work is if someone chooses to go through this process and it doesn't fall under the definition of this narrow definition of sexual harassment, then we could run it through the previous definition of sexual harassment. But they actually have to go through those hoops first. We have no choice. The regulations are very clear that if it might fall under this policy, we have to run it through this policy. So the end result that I fear is that the vast majority of people who I will talk to will choose not to file a complaint. And under the regulations, we're not allowed to do an investigation if they choose to not file a complaint. So we don't even get to confirm if it's happened or not.
Thank you for that clarification. It's disturbing.
Mm-hmm.
To add to that, our BEP does not mention sexual harassment. Could that actually help us?
So I've worked with Bryn, and I know they have it around sexual contact, and I get notifications when those behaviors end up in EduClimber. But yes, I mean, Brittany and I have already had conversations about these policies working with each other and what that would mean and how we can make it as simple as possible for everybody and as supportive as possible for students.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Eric, for, yes, I agree, disturbing. Nikki? Oh, sorry. I had an order, but go ahead, Nikki, because I know you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Eric, two legal questions. One, can we use the Title 10? Can we use the 10th Amendment, try and argue a state claim? Because we could have stronger laws, but not weaker.
I'm going to say, I mean, I would defer to Sherry. I'm going to say no, because there have been multiple lawsuits already. I know I mentioned this in August, and the Wisconsin Attorney General is already in some of those complaints, and everyone so far has been tossed.
Got it. My second question is that how it's coded matters. And if it is multiple things, can you code it one way and not the other?
As in, you're saying if oh, go ahead, I'm sorry.
If, for example, it's sexual, they accuse of sexual harassment, there's also an assault, let's say physical touching, which could be considered illegal, 4th degree sexual assault. Can we focus on the physical behavior, not the other one, and therefore use it under that statute to go around it, or is that not going to work?
No, if it could possibly, I mean, the regulations are pretty clear that if it could possibly fall under Title IX, it has to go through that process.
I was afraid of that. Sorry, just had to ask.
No, thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Savian and then Gomes-Schmidt.
I think Chris Caruzzi asked my main question on how Title VII and Title IX will comply. It is pretty depressing that this puts a lot of the onus of labor on the accuser. But yeah, thank you, Ananda.
Chris?
Yeah, my questions, thanks for the work on this, Eric. I guess one of my questions is what you mentioned in the presentation, additional district resources needed, and I'm sort of curious what that means. And then I guess, if we approve this policy at the end of the month, how do the changes and this addition of this policy and how it interacts with the other policies get communicated to our schools, our staff, our students?
Thank you for both questions. So resources are a few. So the part of it is just time and positions as far as what people are doing now, what they might have to, or if it requires additional positions. And we're trying to figure that out now. The issue with the regulations is that, again, the previous one said you had to have a policy in a process. This says you have to have a Title IX coordinator. You have to have an investigator to investigate it. That investigator doesn't get to make a decision. It goes to a decision maker to decide it. So every single complaint that comes forward has to go to at least 2 individuals, an investigator and a decision maker. And then if there's an appeal, it has to be somebody else who does the appeal. And all 3 of these positions have to be specifically trained in Title IX. So it's a question of, and I'm working with Sherry and other people trying to determine if we're able to do this with what we currently have on staff. But if we are, then that requires taking people away to get specifically trained, and not just investigations, but specifically around Title IX, these cases with all the additional letters that have to go out, and the investigation and the planning and the meetings and the between the when you get to the decision stage, you don't get to just make a decision. You actually, the investigator's findings have to go to both parties, and then both parties get to submit questions to the decision maker to send to the other side. Then they get to get those responses, and they have to give each side another chance to respond to those. I'm saying that all of that takes time, and someone has to do that. And so that's the kind of resources I'm talking about, is figuring out how that can happen along with the time of that. And then around the communication, working on it. So the reason, if you look at the policy, when it gets to like my title under website, there's actually a question mark at the moment because I'm working with communications, and either we're going to probably do a separate Title IX website that has all this information. And so once the policy is approved, then we're going to hopefully open it up and put it out there and send it out and make people aware of the fact that it's there. I'm trying to figure out exactly how to do that, but we're going to let people know that it's there and they have to follow it. And I will say that at the Legal Services Conference in August, all of the principals and assistant principals were all trained to know this is coming already. So they're at least aware of it at this point.
Okay, thank you. That helps. I think the posting versus people actually knowing it's there and how we make sure that both of those pieces happen is important. So
yes,
thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Ali and then Savian.
I guess I'm wondering if there's anything that speaks to kind of developmental appropriateness of these processes, especially since we are, we're talking about kids, like applying this to kids in situations where both parties impacted or all parties impacted could be children, ranging from the age of 4 to the age of 18. So I'm wondering how we're modifying this, or how this speaks specifically to developmentally appropriate processes for children of a range of ages and abilities.
Great question. The regulations do not. The only difference the regulations make to K-12 is that you have to make sure you include the parent or guardian. And that's pretty much the end of it. So that being said, that process that I mentioned has to go for all of this, for any level, age group, developmentally appropriate. That being said, investigators will still need to be trained on who they're actually investigating, not just trauma informed, but also age. Obviously, questions need to be age appropriate on some level, and they have to understand. And then the investigators have to be trained to understand that. But I wish I had a better answer. I wish I had a decent answer. They really are this prescriptive, and I apologize, but.
Yeah. Eric, I think we can't ask for anything more than an honest and accurate answer. And I think if they're, I think it's important. I think it's important for our community to have the greatest possible understanding of kind of the federal guidelines of Title IX under the current administration. However, I think the longer we have the conversation, the more disheartening it is.
Yeah, this has been my summer. I understand. I'm sorry.
Yeah, thank you. And one thing I forgot to mention in the very beginning, I know, Eric, that you've been working on this since the summer and just really waiting to present to us when things were firm. So we didn't have to go back to have lots of different questions about incomplete things that already were not making sense in the summer, and now it makes even less sense. So I really appreciate all the work that you've done on getting the language and trying to play out different scenarios, and then your ability to also network with folks across the country to making sure that we are doing everything we can to support our students. Savian and Chris Caruzzi.
I guess my last question is, what's our flexibility to go back to the old policy if we have a change in federal leadership?
That's a really good question. So I don't have the best answer. So it kind of depends. The issue is that when this administration put forward these new regulations, they followed all the processes and procedures. And what that means is they created the rules and they created the rule and regulations. They put it out for comment as a draft, which all this takes time. And then they have to take in all the comments. Part of the reason these regulations are 2,000 pages is the government's required to be responsive to all the comments they receive. Whether they actually change anything or not, they still have to acknowledge they received the comments, and they received, I think it was like 120 or 130,000 comments regarding this. And then once it's done, then they can finalize the rule. So the current one we have has been in process for like over 2 years. So it's a law. To change the law, if the administration changes, and I will say that Vice President Biden has acknowledged that he would change things. He's already said that. But to change it is not going to happen overnight. That being said, if he changes, what I'm not sure is what happens if he changes the emphasis. Like if he tells people we don't have to investigate this or, not to do that. I'm stuck a little bit with that. And it depends on what he says, because at the end of the day, it's still the law. So I'm not exactly sure how that would work out. And I belong to a professional organization that's big into this. And like I said, work with other people across the country. So I would work with them to see what exactly we could do with that. But the regulation itself is probably going to be here for, I'm going to guess, at least 2 years before, if the administration changes, before they could actually get into effect of changing that.
I'm just having a really proud moment of all my colleagues around this discussion. Chris, did you have another question?
Yeah, this goes beyond the policy, but often when sexual harassment is happening, it doesn't just affect the person who is being harassed. It affects all the kids in the classroom if it's happening in a classroom. And this policy very much approaches it as if it's just two people who are involved and not a community. And we know that often it affects a community in negative ways and impacts the learning of a community of learners in negative ways. Getting beyond the policy, what can we do to ensure that despite the letter of the law, we're able to continue to support a positive learning environment in MMSD, particularly if someone is being sexually harassed and chooses not to move forward with a complaint because this law makes it very difficult and potentially puts people in a vulnerable position to do so?
So as you, I think all know, the district works with the Rape Crisis Center. They've been in some of our schools. So there's that work going on. And I'm happy to work with anybody around, with any group, and I've met with student groups and schools around different issues that come up. The one thing I will say that is in the regulations that I have not mentioned is they do have the term supportive measures. And so supportive measures they're still not what they used to be, but they're designed to support students. So the way, or anyone who brings forward a complaint. So if someone brings forward a report, even if they choose to not file a complaint, they still would get support. They can still, even under the regulations, can get supportive measures. The restriction is what we used to do, and actually what the guidance used to be from the Office of Civil Rights was, if someone came forward, you would inconvenience the alleged bad actor and not the student or the person who's coming forward. Under these regulations, you can still take steps to support that person, even if they don't file a complaint. The limitation is you can't really do anything against the alleged bad actor because that goes against due process because they haven't had an opportunity to respond to an allegation. But that's the other thing that is built into the that still exists in the regulations. So we would still be able to do supportive measures. And the vast majority of times I work with schools, I mean, that's what schools do. They work really hard to support the students in the environment so they can keep all the kids in the environment so they can keep doing their best to stay present and stay engaged within the learning environment and support them however other resources are available to them. So that can still continue to happen.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, excuse me, thank you, Eric. I don't see anybody else's hand. It is for voting at the next meeting, and I don't see us making the type of progress we would like to see in this order. Dr. Jenkins, any final words on this item or anything else? Oh, Gloria.
I just have a question. I mean, like, what if the board doesn't pass this on our board meeting?
It's a good question.
We're legally out of compliance.
I mean, what
being disruptor and not following the rules.
I mean, what happens if we don't support this?
Oh, I'll answer it. If Sherry wants to add anything, she's welcome to. It's federal law. We still have to follow it. And there's actually language in there that if we choose not to, Technically, they could take away our funding.
So, but what if the board does not vote to support this? You still follow it, but what if the board does not support this? I mean, so it's going to come to us, right, at our regularly scheduled board meeting.
Right.
Vote no. I mean, you guys still follow procedure, right? You guys
We
still
have,
follow the law?
yes, I'm not sure if choosing not to file it, how that would impact like the federal funding or anything like that, but I'll defer to Sherry.
Gloria, it's likely that they would say that the district is not in compliance because the board has voted not to follow the law, which is basically evidenced by the passing of the policy and the posting of the policy, because technically, if the board does not pass it, we cannot post the policy as a policy of the board.
Actually, if I could add one thing to that, that then goes towards some of the questions about transparency and informing people. Because then we're being in a position of having to enforce this without having the ability to point to a policy and let people know what's actually there for them to find it.
Yeah, I guess my concern about all this is that this is a federal mandated policy or law, right, that we have to follow. So why does it come to the board then? I mean, why do we have to vote on this? I mean, particularly if we don't support it.
Because we have to change our policy book, right?
Because yeah, it's
We have
similar.
to change our language within our policy to make this.
Right.
Yes.
So like I said,
So
the
wait.
original I'm sorry to clear, like, so the original regulations said we had to have a Title IX coordinator position and policies and procedures. We still are required to have the policies.
All right.
Sorry.
Yeah, this is a tough one for me, but
For me too.
Yeah.
It's been really hard.
It's awful.
It'll be interesting to see what happens tomorrow.
Don't jinx anything.
I also feel like there's a strong sentiment here that if Sherry, you wake up at 3 a.m. thinking about ways or language that we can say or whatever in protest of this, and or mechanisms that we can empower specifically our young people around navigating this, I would fully support, and I'm sure I've seen some nods here from my colleagues as well. It is extremely disturbing.
yeah, particularly if we have to vote on it, right? In affirmative, like majority to pass a policy that we don't support. I mean, generally we are able in positions to support, vote yes or no as elected officials on a policy change, and have that authority. But, so this just makes it different for us. Okay.
One last thing I'd add is finding different ways for the board as a whole to like collectively advocate at the federal level that this is not in the best interest of our students or our staff or our district.
That's true. For sure.
You could always issue a board statement
Yeah.
stating we are required by federal law to pass this. However, we are doing it under duress.
Ooh, I like that a lot, Nikki. Thank you. Appreciate that. Wow, everyone. That's really gloomy. Dr. Jenkins.
I just tell you, it's sobering in a sense. I just don't see any good out of this. And Eric, I want to tell you, first of all, excellent job explaining this. He and I had a conversation prior to this. And it's just really, we as a district have to continue to uphold what we say in terms of our core values and making sure that we're protecting all of our students, making sure that they know that they belong in our district at all time. And I think the public statement, it does to come to the board for a vote, I think what Nikki just said is something that, you know, we really need to consider because it's just a bad position to be in, period. And when I think about all of our students, all of our staff, this is not a very positive message. I'll just be very frank. I'm disturbed by it, to be frank. Very disturbed that we are being put in this kind of position.
Thank you, Dr. Jenkins. Okay, we are also closing our evening tonight with another sad news. Dr. John Odom, who has been one of the strongest advocates for education in the Madison area, has passed away over the weekend. Dr. Odom was the first affirmative action officer for MMSD, and he was also the first Black principal at Cherokee Middle School. And most, you know, he had his own consultant, and he was one of the leaders for the Charles Hamilton Houston Institute through a lot of his advocacy was being done. I think he would have really have appreciated the early part of our meeting today, specifically talking about early literacy. I do want to quote something that he had whispered in my ear several times, and I know it was also a theme of some of his writings. He published many articles, and he said, "Let's converse less and do more." So with that, I would like to invite my colleagues to take a moment of silence in memory of the immense body of work that Dr. Odom, oh please, I've been holding out tears. In memory of all the advocacy that Dr. Odom have done over the decades for this community relentlessly, and in all the ways that he supported many of us that are in the board right now, and many educators across our district. With that, I would just invite everyone for a moment of silence. Thank you, everyone. I do plan to send something to his family. Maybe we can, if everyone is in agreement, I would love to send in all of our behalf, and maybe Gloria, you and I can connect on that, and you can send on our behalf since you're the president. I'm sure his family would really appreciate that gesture. This is also wow, this is a really gloomy evening for many reasons, because it's also the eve of what's soon to be a reckoning, the continuing of the reckoning of 2020. So I wish you all a lot of love and a lot of compassion, and I really hope that you have not just a plan to vote if you haven't voted, but also a plan to find spaces for respite and find spaces to experience some love and connection with others. I know tomorrow is there will be 24 hours of a lot of uneasiness, and I'm pretty sure will leak throughout the rest of the week. So with that, I just wanted to close our meeting today and ask for a motion for closing, but I'm appreciative that this evening had some really positive things in it, something to look forward to after the soon to be a lot of uncertainties for us in our district, but all over the country. Can someone entertain a motion to adjourn? All those in favor signify by say aye. A motion carried. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Barb, and thank you, Dr. Jenkins, for a really important meeting tonight.